Daniel Reed's hands trembled on the steering wheel as his boss slid into the passenger seat and closed the door with a finality that made his stomach drop. Victoria Lane, the woman who could end his career with a phone call, who controlled boardrooms with a glance, turned to him in the dim parking garage and said 5 words that made the air leave his lungs. Drive somewhere private. Don't ask questions. Every instinct screamed danger. Every survival mechanism he'd honed as a single father told him to refuse. But something in her voice wasn't seduction or power. It was desperation. And that terrified him more than anything else. Before we dive into this story about 2 people trapped in different cages discovering the courage to break free, I want to invite you to stay with me until the very end. This is a story about the prisons we build from success and safety and what it costs to finally walk away. Please hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, let's begin. The conference hall buzzed with the manufactured energy of corporate celebration, crystal clinking against crystal, laughter that sounded rehearsed, conversations calibrated for advantage. Daniel Reed stood near the bar nursing a club soda, his tie loosened just enough to suggest he'd tried to relax but couldn't quite manage it. Around him, account executives from Nexus Solutions traded war stories about closed deals and difficult clients, their voices rising with each round of drinks. Daniel had stopped drinking 3 years ago, right after the divorce was finalized. Not because he'd had a problem, but because he couldn't afford the luxury of impaired judgment anymore. Not when Emma was waiting at home with the babysitter, probably already asleep with her stuffed rabbit clutched against her chest, her dark hair spread across the pillow like her mother's used to be. "Reed!" A hand clapped his shoulder hard enough to make him wince. Marcus Chen from the Eastern Regional Office, already 3 drinks deep and showing it. "Why aren't you celebrating? You crushed your numbers this quarter. Victoria mentioned you specifically during her speech." Daniel forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Just pacing myself. Got to drive home." "Always so responsible," Marcus said, the compliment carrying the faint edge of mockery. "That's why you're stuck in mid-level management while the rest of us are gunning for VP positions. You never take risks, man." The comment landed exactly where Marcus intended, but Daniel let it slide off him with the practice of someone who'd learned to protect himself through strategic invisibility. Taking risks was a luxury for people who had safety nets. Daniel had a 6-year-old daughter whose world would collapse if he stumbled. That made every decision different. "Excuse me, gentlemen." The voice cut through their conversation like a blade through silk, precise, controlled, utterly commanding. Victoria Lane herself stood 3 feet away, her champagne glass untouched in her hand, her expression unreadable behind the professional warmth she wore like armor. "Mr. Reed, might I borrow you for a moment?" Marcus's eyes went wide. Being singled out by the CEO at a company function was either the best thing that could happen to your career or the beginning of the end. There was rarely middle ground with Victoria Lane. "Of course, Ms. Lane," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. She led him away from the crowd, through the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Los Angeles skyline, toward a quieter corner where the ambient noise faded to a manageable murmur. Up close, Daniel noticed things most people missed: the faint tension in her jaw, the way her fingers gripped the champagne glass just a fraction too tightly, the microscopic crack in the flawless veneer she presented to the world. "I need to leave," she said quietly, her eyes scanning the room behind him as though checking for observers. "I drove myself here, but I've had 2 glasses of wine and I don't feel comfortable driving. My driver is off tonight. Would you be willing to take me home?" It was a simple request, perfectly reasonable, the kind of thing that happened at corporate events all the time. But something in the way she asked, the careful neutrality of her tone, the deliberate lack of eye contact, made Daniel's instincts prickle with warning. "Of course," he said, anyway, because what else could he say? "You didn't refuse Victoria Lane. Not if you valued your job. Not if you had a daughter who needed health insurance and stability and a father who came home every night. Thank you." Relief flickered across her face so quickly he might have imagined it. "I'll meet you at the parking garage elevator in 10 minutes. I need to make a few goodbyes first." She disappeared back into the crowd with the grace of someone who'd spent decades performing the role of CEO, leaving Daniel standing alone with a sick feeling growing in his stomach. He pulled out his phone and texted Rosa, his neighbor who watched Emma most evenings. Might be a bit late. Work thing. Everything okay? The response came immediately. All good. Emma's been asleep since 8:30. Take your time. Daniel pocketed his phone and made his way toward the parking garage, nodding to colleagues as he passed, but not stopping to engage. The fluorescent lights of the garage were harsh after the warm ambiance of the conference hall, turning everything stark and clinical. He found his car, a 7-year-old Honda Accord with a car seat still buckled in the back, and waited. Victoria appeared exactly 10 minutes later, her heels clicking against the concrete with metronomic precision. She'd changed somehow in those few minutes, though Daniel couldn't quite identify what was different. The armor was still in place, but something underneath had shifted. She slid into the passenger seat without ceremony, pulling the door closed with a soft click. For a moment they sat in silence, the car's interior light casting harsh shadows across both their faces. Your address? Daniel asked, starting the engine. Victoria stared straight ahead at the concrete wall in front of them. Actually, I need you to drive somewhere else first. Somewhere private. Don't ask questions. Just drive. And there it was. The moment that could change everything. The request that sounded like the beginning of a lawsuit, a scandal, a career-ending mistake. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel as every alarm bell in his head started ringing. Ms. Lane, please. The word came out cracked, stripped of its usual authority. I'm not asking for anything inappropriate. I just need to go somewhere that isn't my house, or my office, or in any place where people know who I am. I need... She stopped, her composure fracturing. I need to breathe. Daniel looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time since she'd gotten in the car. Victoria Lane was 42 years old, though she looked younger thanks to what money and discipline could buy. She'd built Nexus Solutions from a mid-sized regional firm into a national powerhouse over the course of 15 years, earning a reputation for brilliance and ruthlessness in equal measure. Forbes had profiled her twice. Industry magazines quoted her constantly. She sat on 3 corporate boards and donated generously to arts organizations while maintaining an image of absolute control. And right now, sitting in his passenger seat in a parking garage, she looked like someone drowning. There's a jazz bar in Silver Lake, Daniel heard himself say. Quiet place. No one from the company goes there. No one will recognize you. Victoria nodded once, sharply. Yes, that. Please. Daniel put the car in reverse and pulled out of the parking space, acutely aware of the woman beside him and the dangerous territory they were entering, not the territory she'd implied. This wasn't about attraction or power dynamics or the kind of scandal that destroyed careers. This was somehow more frightening because it was more human. This was about someone in freefall reaching for anything solid, and Daniel wasn't sure he was stable enough himself to be anyone's anchor. They drove in silence through the Los Angeles night, the city lights blurring past the windows. Victoria kept her eyes fixed forward, her hands folded in her lap with white-knuckled precision. Daniel navigated toward Silver Lake with the focused attention he usually reserved for driving Emma to school, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The Blue Note was tucked between a vintage bookstore and a closed laundromat, marked only by a small neon sign that had been flickering for as long as Daniel could remember. He'd discovered it during the worst months of his divorce, when he needed somewhere to sit alone without anyone asking questions or offering sympathy. The owner, Marcus, no relation to his colleague, ran a clean establishment with decent musicians and an unspoken policy of minding your own business. Daniel found parking half a block away and killed the engine. Victoria hadn't moved. We don't have to go in, he said quietly. I can take you home if you've changed your mind. No. She unbuckled her seatbelt with deliberate movements. I need this. Whatever this is. The bar was half empty on a Tuesday night, with a quartet playing Miles Davis covers on the small stage at the back. The music was good enough to fill the silence, but not so demanding that you couldn't talk over it. Daniel chose a booth in the corner, far from the stage and the handful of other patrons scattered throughout the room. Victoria slid into the booth across from him and immediately removed her blazer, draping it over the worn vinyl seat beside her. It was such a small gesture, taking off her armor, but it felt monumental. A waitress approached, and Daniel ordered coffee. Victoria hesitated, then ordered the same. "I haven't been in a place like this in 20 years, Victoria said when they were alone again. Her voice had lost the corporate polish, settling into something more textured and real. "I used to go to jazz clubs in college, before I decided who I was going to be." Daniel wrapped his hands around his coffee cup when it arrived, letting the heat ground him. "Who were you going to be?" "Someone who mattered." Victoria's laugh was hollow. "Someone who made a difference. Someone whose name meant something. And I did that. I built an empire from nothing. I employ 3,000 people. I've donated millions to causes I believe in. I sit in rooms where decisions get made that affect people's lives." She paused, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "And I can't remember the last time I felt anything real." The quartet shifted into a slower piece, something melancholic and searching. Daniel thought about his own life, the careful calculations, the strategic invisibility, the way he'd optimized himself out of existence, trying to keep Emma safe and stable. "I'm not the right person for this conversation," he said finally. "I'm barely keeping my own life together. That's why I asked you." Victoria met his eyes for the first time since they'd sat down. "Everyone else in my life wants something from me. They need me to be Victoria Lane, CEO. They need the decisions I make, the doors I open, the opportunities I create. You're the first person in years who's looked at me tonight and seen someone who might need help instead of someone who can provide it." Daniel thought about the irony of that. Him, the struggling single father, working 60-hour weeks to maintain mid-level status, somehow becoming a safe harbor for one of the most powerful women in their industry. "I saw you at the company picnic last summer," Victoria continued, her voice dropping lower. "You were with your daughter, Emma, right? She fell off the swing set, scraped her knee. You didn't panic or make a scene. You just sat with her in the grass and let her cry until she was ready to stop. Then you cleaned the scrape and asked if she wanted to try the swings again or play somewhere else. You gave her the choice. No pressure, no agenda. Just presence." "That's just parenting," Daniel said, uncomfortable with the observation. "No, it's not. Not the kind I see most places. Most parents I know are performing, showing everyone how perfect their family is, how well-adjusted their children are. You weren't performing. You were just there. And I remember thinking—" She stopped, her composure cracking again. "I remember thinking that I couldn't remember the last time anyone had just been present with me like that. No agenda, no performance, just presence." The weight of her loneliness settled over the table like fog. Daniel felt the urge to reach across and offer comfort, but he kept his hands on his coffee cup. This wasn't the time for gesture. This was the time for listening. "My marriage ended 3 years ago," Daniel said quietly. "Sarah, my ex-wife, she wasn't a bad person. Neither was I. But we'd built this entire life around what we thought we were supposed to want. The house, the careers, the perfect family. And somewhere in all that optimization, we forgot to check if we actually loved each other. By the time Emma was born, we were already strangers sharing a mortgage." "What broke it?" Victoria asked. "Nothing dramatic. That was the worst part. No affair, no betrayal, just the slow realization that we were both pretending to be happy, and neither of us was brave enough to stop. Until one night, she came home and said she couldn't do it anymore. And I realized I'd been waiting for her to say it because I couldn't say it myself. Because of Emma." "Because of Emma," Daniel confirmed. "Because I couldn't risk her stability for something as selfish as my own happiness. But Sarah was braver than me. She knew Emma deserved parents who were honest about who they were, even if that meant being honest about not wanting to be married anymore." Victoria was quiet for a long moment, processing this. "Do you regret it?" "Every day," Daniel said honestly, "and not at all. It's both things at once. I regret that I couldn't be who Sarah needed. I regret that Emma has to navigate 2 houses and custody schedules. But I don't regret that we stopped pretending. She deserved better than that. We all did." The quartet finished their set and announced a break. In the sudden quiet, Victoria's breathing seemed too loud, too ragged. "I met with a lawyer 4 months ago," she said, the words tumbling out like a confession. "I didn't tell anyone. Not my assistant, not my board, not my husband. I made the appointment under a false name and paid cash. I sat in that lawyer's office for 2 hours, and talked about dismantling my entire life. Daniel's coffee had gone cold, but he didn't move to order more. What stopped you? Fear. Practical fear and existential fear all mixed together. Fear of what the board would do. Fear of what the industry would say. Fear of what I'd be without the title and the company and the carefully constructed image. Fear that if I stripped away Victoria Lane CEO, there'd be nothing underneath worth keeping. That's not true, Daniel said. How do you know? The question came out sharp, challenging. You don't know me. You know the person I am at work. You know the polished presentation. But that person was built, Daniel, constructed piece by piece to be exactly what success required. I don't know if there's anything real underneath. Daniel thought about his own careful constructions, the way he'd optimized himself into a safe, reliable, ultimately invisible version of who he'd once thought he might become. I think that's what tonight is about, he said slowly, testing whether there's something real underneath. You didn't ask me to drive you to a hotel. You didn't proposition me or create a scandal. You asked me to take you somewhere you could breathe. That's not the action of someone who's hollow. That's someone who knows they're suffocating and is trying to survive. Victoria's eyes glistened in the low light, but she didn't cry. Daniel suspected she'd trained herself out of crying years ago, the same way she'd trained herself out of visible vulnerability. I have a son, she said abruptly. Cameron. He's 19, finishing his first year at Columbia. We talk twice a month, scheduled calls where we update each other on our lives like colleagues filing reports. He's polite, accomplished, completely distant, and I have no idea how to bridge that gap because I don't know how to be his mother instead of his CEO. Does he know you want to bridge it? I don't think he'd believe me if I told him. I've spent his entire life modeling that success requires sacrifice, that ambition demands everything, that personal feelings are weaknesses to be managed. And he learned those lessons perfectly. He's becoming exactly what I taught him to be. Her voice cracked. And I hate it. The waitress returned to refill their coffee, and they both fell silent until she'd left again. The quartet was returning to the stage, tuning their instruments for the next set. My daughter still believes I can fix anything, Daniel said. She thinks I have all the answers. And every day I feel like I'm one mistake away from her realizing I'm just as lost as everyone else. The only difference is I'm better at hiding it. You're not hiding it from me tonight, Victoria observed. No, Daniel agreed. I'm not. Maybe that's what this is. Two people who are tired of hiding finally admitting they don't have it figured out. Victoria reached for her coffee with both hands, cradling it like warmth was something she'd forgotten existed. What would you do if you weren't afraid? The question hung between them, enormous and dangerous. I'd quit my job, Daniel said, surprising himself with the immediacy of the answer. I'd find work that didn't require me to erase myself to stay safe. I'd show Emma what it looks like to choose integrity over security. I'd stop optimizing my life into nothing and start living like the choices matter. And what's stopping you? The same thing that's stopping you. Fear that I'll fail. Fear that I'll prove everyone right who said I was settling for mediocrity. Fear that I'm not actually capable of anything better than what I have now. Victoria set down her coffee cup with deliberate precision. What if we're both wrong? What if the thing we're most afraid of, being nothing without the armor, what if that's the lie we've been telling ourselves to justify staying trapped? Then we've wasted a lot of years, Daniel said quietly. Yes, Victoria agreed. We have. The quartet launched into their next set, something up-tempo and defiant. Around them, the handful of other patrons settled deeper into their conversations or their solitude. The world kept spinning, indifferent to the small earthquake happening in the corner booth. I can't make any promises, Victoria said after a long silence. I can't tell you I'm going to walk away from everything tomorrow. The momentum of my life is enormous. There are contracts and obligations and people depending on me. But I needed tonight. I needed to sit across from someone and say out loud that I'm not okay. That I haven't been okay for a very long time, and that I don't know how to fix it, but I know I can't keep pretending it doesn't matter. That's more honest than most people ever get, Daniel said. Is it enough? I don't know. But it's a start. They sat in the Blue Note until the quartet finished their second set, and the waitress started giving them meaningful looks about ordering something besides coffee. Daniel paid the check, Victoria didn't fight him on it, and they walked back to his car through streets that had grown quieter as midnight approached. "Where to?" Daniel asked when they were both buckled in. Victoria gave him an address in Hancock Park, one of the old money neighborhoods where houses had names and security systems that cost more than Daniel made in a year. They drove in comfortable silence, the earlier tension transmuted into something more contemplative. When they pulled up to the gate of her estate, because it was an estate, not just a house, Victoria didn't immediately get out. She sat with her hand on the door handle, staring at the imposing structure beyond the gate as though it were a prison instead of a privilege. "My husband is in Singapore this week," she said quietly. "Business trip. He'll be back Friday, and we'll have dinner together and discuss our schedules and obligations, and he'll tell me about his meetings, and I'll tell him about mine, and neither of us will mention that we're essentially business partners who happen to share a last name and a mortgage." "How long?" Daniel asked. 12 years married, 7 years since it meant anything real. She turned to look at him, her face half-shadowed in the dim light from the gate. "Thank you for tonight, for not asking me to be anyone except whoever showed up. That's a rare gift." "You did the same for me," Daniel said. Victoria nodded once, then opened the door and stepped out into the cool night air. She leaned back down to look at him through the open door. "Daniel, what you said about showing Emma what it looks like to choose integrity over security. I think you're already doing that, just by being who you are, just by showing up and being present. That matters more than you think." Before he could respond, she closed the door and walked through the gate, her shoulders straight and her head high, every inch the CEO, even at midnight in her own driveway. Daniel watched until she disappeared inside the massive house, then pulled away and headed toward his own neighborhood. Small houses with overgrown lawns where normal people lived, normal lives that felt less normal every year. He got home just after 1 a.m. Rosa had fallen asleep on his couch waiting for him, and he woke her gently and paid her double for staying so late. After she'd left, he checked on Emma, still sleeping peacefully, her rabbit tucked under her chin, and then collapsed onto his own bed fully clothed. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "I meant what I said. Thank you." VL Daniel stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a response. "Thank you for trusting me. Be kind to yourself." He sent it before he could overthink it, then set his phone on the nightstand and closed his eyes. Tomorrow he'd go back to being Daniel Reed, mid-level sales manager, safe and invisible and optimized for survival. But tonight, for a few hours, he'd been someone who mattered enough for Victoria Lane to show him the truth beneath the armor. And something about that felt like it might change everything. The alarm went off at 6:30, dragging Daniel out of restless sleep filled with fragments of conversation and the ghost of Victoria's voice saying she hadn't felt anything real in years. He lay there for a moment, staring at the ceiling with its water stain shaped like Nebraska, trying to reconcile the previous night with the ordinary morning pressing in around him. Emma's footsteps padded down the hallway, and then her face appeared in his doorway, sleep-tousled and curious. "You were out really late, Daddy," she said, climbing onto his bed without invitation. "Rosa said you had to help your boss." Daniel pulled her close, breathing in the strawberry shampoo smell of her hair. "Yeah, baby. Sometimes grown-ups need help too." "Was she sick?" "Something like that." It wasn't exactly a lie. There were different kinds of sickness, and the kind that came from suffocating in your own life was as real as any fever. He made Emma pancakes while she chattered about a project at school, some elaborate construction involving popsicle sticks and glue that she described with the intensity of an architect presenting plans for a skyscraper. Daniel listened and responded in the right places, but part of his mind was still in that booth at the Blue Note, watching Victoria Lane dismantle her own mythology one careful word at a time. After he dropped Emma at school, she kissed his cheek and ran toward her best friend without looking back, the way 6-year-olds do when their world still feels secure. Daniel drove to the office with a strange sense of dislocation, as though he'd stepped sideways into a parallel version of his life where everything looked the same, but the foundation had shifted. The Nexus Solutions building rose 32 stories above downtown Los Angeles, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive modernity that announced ambition from blocks away. Daniel badged through security, nodded to colleagues in the elevator, and settled into his cubicle on the 14th floor surrounded by 40 other mid-level managers doing exactly what he did: moving numbers around, managing accounts, optimizing processes to squeeze another percentage point of efficiency out of systems that were already running at maximum capacity. His phone buzzed with a meeting invitation. Conference room 14B, 9 a.m. Subject line: Quarterly Review Follow-Up. Attendees: Daniel Reed, Marcus Chen, Jennifer Park, Victoria Lane. Daniel's stomach dropped. Quarterly reviews didn't usually involve the CEO unless something was very wrong or very right, and he was fairly certain his performance wasn't exceptional enough to warrant the latter. At 8:55, he gathered his tablet and headed toward the conference room, his mind racing through possibilities. Had someone seen them leave together last night? Had Victoria regretted her vulnerability and decided to create professional distance by reassigning him? Had he somehow crossed a line he didn't even know existed? Marcus was already in the conference room when Daniel arrived, looking smug in the way people do when they think they're about to witness someone else's downfall. Jennifer Park, the director of client relations, sat across from him reviewing something on her laptop with focused intensity. "Reed," Marcus said with false cheerfulness. "Interesting that Victoria herself is joining this meeting. Must be important." Daniel took a seat and said nothing. He'd learned years ago that silence was often the safest response when people were fishing for information. Victoria entered at precisely 9 o'clock, her assistant trailing behind with an armful of folders. She wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested both authority and a complete absence of time for frivolity. Nothing about her acknowledged the woman who'd sat across from him 12 hours earlier, admitting she couldn't remember the last time she'd felt anything real. "Thank you all for making time this morning," Victoria said, settling into the chair at the head of the table. Her voice was crisp, professional, completely devoid of the raw honesty that had characterized their conversation at the Blue Note. "I wanted to discuss some organizational changes that will be rolling out over the next quarter." Jennifer looked up from her laptop with interest. Marcus leaned forward slightly, scenting opportunity. "We're restructuring the sales division," Victoria continued, "moving away from the traditional hierarchical model toward something more collaborative. Regional offices will have more autonomy, but they'll also have more accountability. We're implementing new metrics that prioritize client retention and satisfaction over short-term revenue generation." Marcus's expression soured immediately. His entire approach to sales was built on aggressive short-term tactics that drove numbers up regardless of long-term sustainability. "That's going to impact quarterly bonuses," he said, not bothering to hide his displeasure. "Yes," Victoria agreed with zero inflection. "It will reward different behaviors than we've traditionally incentivized, which brings me to why I've asked you here specifically." Her eyes moved to Daniel for the first time since entering the room, and for just a fraction of a second he saw something beneath the professional mask. Acknowledgement, maybe, or solidarity. "I've been reviewing performance data across all our managers, looking not just at revenue numbers, but at client feedback, team satisfaction, and long-term relationship building. Daniel, your retention rates are the highest in your division. Your clients consistently rate their experience with Nexus as excellent, and your team reports indicate strong morale and low turnover." Daniel felt everyone's attention shift to him like a spotlight. This was not what he'd expected. "I'm recommending you for the new regional coordinator position we're creating for the Western Territory," Victoria said. "It's a significant promotion with corresponding salary adjustment and expanded responsibilities. You'd be overseeing client strategy for the entire region and mentoring other managers in the relationship-building approach that's made you successful." The silence in the room was deafening. Marcus looked like he'd been slapped. Jennifer was watching Daniel with calculation, already adjusting her assessment of his importance in the organizational ecosystem. Daniel started, then stopped. His mind was racing. This was exactly the kind of opportunity people spent their entire careers pursuing: more money, more stability, more security for Emma. The logical response was immediate acceptance and gratitude. But something about it felt wrong. Something about Victoria offering him this promotion less than 12 hours after telling him she'd built her entire identity around success that had left her hollow. It felt like a trap, even if she didn't intend it that way. "Can I have some time to consider?" Daniel heard himself say. Marcus made a sound that might have been a laugh or a cough. Jennifer's eyebrows rose slightly. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes that looked almost like approval. "Of course," Victoria said smoothly. "It's a significant decision. Take until Friday to think it over. We'll need an answer by then for planning purposes." The meeting continued for another 20 minutes, covering implementation timelines and transition logistics, but Daniel barely heard any of it. His mind was stuck on the central paradox. Victoria was offering him the very thing she'd confessed was destroying her: more responsibility, more success, more of the armor that protected you from having to feel anything real. When the meeting finally ended, Marcus left immediately without speaking to anyone. Jennifer gathered her materials and offered Daniel a tight smile that suggested she was already strategizing how to leverage this development. Victoria remained seated, her assistant hovering nearby. "Jennifer, could you give us a moment?" Victoria said pleasantly. It wasn't a request. Jennifer left, closing the door behind her. The assistant followed, leaving Daniel alone with Victoria in the glass-walled conference room where anyone walking past could see them but not hear their conversation. "You think I'm a hypocrite," Victoria said without preamble. Daniel considered lying, then decided against it. "I think you're doing what you know how to do, solving problems with promotions and organizational restructuring. But you don't want the promotion." "I didn't say that." "You didn't have to." Victoria stood and moved to the window, looking out over the city sprawled below them. "When I got home last night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what you said, about showing Emma what it looks like to choose integrity over security. And I realized I was about to do the exact opposite of that lesson." Daniel waited, understanding that she needed to work through this out loud. "I can't change my entire life overnight," Victoria continued. "I have contracts and obligations, and 3,000 employees whose livelihoods depend on decisions I make. But I can start making different choices. Smaller choices. The promotion I offered you, it's real. The metrics I outlined are real. I'm trying to shift the entire culture of this company towards something more sustainable, more human. But I'm also aware that I might be asking you to become what I'm trying to stop being. Then why offer it? Because you're good at this. Because you understand something most people in this industry never figure out, that relationships matter more than transactions, that treating people with dignity and presence creates loyalty that lasts beyond the next quarterly report. I want managers who understand that. I want to build a company where those values actually mean something instead of just appearing in mission statements that nobody reads. And you think I can do that from a position of more power? Victoria turned to face him, and for a moment the mask slipped again, revealing the woman from the blue note. "I think you have a choice I didn't give myself at your age. You can take the promotion and try to maintain your integrity within a system that will constantly pressure you to compromise it. Or you can refuse it and stay where you are, safe and invisible and slowly disappearing. Or you can do something else entirely. What's the third option? I don't know. That's what I'm trying to figure out myself." Victoria's phone buzzed with what was undoubtedly the next meeting, the next crisis, the next decision that required Victoria Lane, CEO, instead of whoever she might be underneath. "Take the time I offered. Think about what you actually want, not what seems safest or most logical, and know that whatever you decide, it won't affect your current position. This isn't a test or a manipulation. It's a genuine offer from someone who respects what you've built and wants to see if there's a way to scale it without destroying it." She left before Daniel could respond, her heels clicking against the polished floor with the same metronomic precision as the night before. Daniel stood alone in the conference room for a long moment, watching her disappear into the elevator, surrounded by assistants and the constant demands of being the person everyone needed her to be. The rest of the day passed in a blur of routine tasks that suddenly felt weighted with significance. Every decision, every interaction, every moment of strategic invisibility felt like a choice he was making about who he wanted to be. By the time 5 o'clock arrived, Daniel was exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical tiredness. He picked up Emma from after-school care, and she was full of stories about the popsicle stick project and some drama involving her friend Olivia and another girl named Bethany that Daniel couldn't quite follow, but that seemed monumentally important to Emma's 6-year-old social universe. "Daddy, you're not listening," Emma said as they pulled into their driveway. "I'm sorry, baby," Tell me again about Bethany. Never mind. It's too late now. The moment is gone. She said it with such dramatic finality that Daniel had to suppress a smile. They made dinner together, or rather, Emma helped him make dinner, which meant the process took twice as long and created 3 times the mess, but she insisted on being involved, and Daniel had learned to prioritize connection over efficiency. While the pasta boiled, Emma sat at the kitchen table working on homework, basic addition problems that she approached with the seriousness of someone solving differential equations. "Daddy, what's 7 plus 8? What do you think it is?" Emma counted on her fingers, her face scrunched in concentration. 15? Perfect. "I'm good at math," she announced with the confidence of someone whose worldview hadn't yet been complicated by self-doubt. "You're good at lots of things," Daniel said, stirring the sauce. "Are you good at your job?" The question caught him off guard. "Why do you ask?" "Because at school, Mrs. Henderson said we should ask our parents what they're good at, for career day next month." Emma looked up from her homework with those dark eyes that saw more than he sometimes wanted them to see. "So what are you good at?" Daniel thought about the promotion sitting on his desk like a ticking bomb. He thought about Victoria's question. What did he actually want, not what seemed safest? He thought about all the years he'd spent being good at optimization and strategic invisibility and erasing himself for security. "I'm good at showing up," he said finally. "I'm good at being present for the people who matter to me. I'm good at trying to do right by people even when it costs me something." Emma considered this with the gravity of a philosopher. "That's not really a job, though." "No," Daniel agreed, "but it's maybe the thing that matters most about how I do my job." She seemed satisfied with this answer and returned to her math problems. Daniel served dinner and they ate together at the kitchen table while Emma told him more elaborate stories about her day. After dinner, he helped her with her bath, read her 2 chapters of the book they were working through together, and tucked her in with her rabbit. "Daddy?" she said as he was turning off the light. "If you got a new job, would we have to move?" "Where's this coming from?" "Olivia's dad got a new job and they're moving to San Diego, and she's really sad about leaving her school." Daniel sat back down on the edge of her bed. "I'm not planning to move us anywhere. We're staying right here in our house." "But what if you got a really good job somewhere else?" "Then I'd have to decide what matters more, the job or staying where you're happy and settled, and I already know what I'd choose." Emma studied his face in the dim light from the hallway. "You'd choose me." "Every time," Daniel said, and meant it with a fierceness that surprised him. She smiled and settled deeper into her pillow. "I love you, Daddy." "I love you too, baby, more than anything." After Emma fell asleep, Daniel sat on the back porch with a beer he didn't really want, staring at the overgrown yard that he kept meaning to deal with but never found time for. His phone buzzed with a text from his ex-wife. "Emma mentioned you might be getting a promotion. Is that true?" Daniel sighed and typed a response. "It's being offered. Haven't decided yet." "Why wouldn't you take it? More money, more stability. Isn't that what you always wanted?" He stared at that message for a long time, feeling the weight of Sarah's unspoken accusation, that he'd chosen security over authenticity in their marriage, that he'd optimized their relationship into nothing, that he'd been so focused on building the safe, stable life they were supposed to want, that he'd forgotten to check if either of them actually wanted it. "I don't know what I want," he typed back. "That's the problem." 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Sarah's response came through. "That's the first honest thing you've said in years. Maybe start there." Daniel set his phone down and let the night sounds wash over him, crickets and distant traffic, and the hum of air conditioning units. Somewhere across the city, Victoria was probably sitting in her mansion that felt like a prison, navigating a marriage that had become a business partnership, being the person everyone needed instead of whoever she actually was. The parallel felt too close, too uncomfortable. 2 people on opposite ends of success, discovering they'd both ended up in cages they'd built themselves. His phone rang, breaking the silence. Unknown number, but he recognized it from the previous night's text. "Hello?" "Daniel, it's Victoria." Her voice was quieter than he'd ever heard it at work, stripped of its corporate authority. "I'm sorry for calling so late. I know this crosses professional boundaries, but I need to tell you something before I lose my nerve." "Okay," Daniel said, his heart rate picking up. I called my lawyer again today. The same one I saw 4 months ago, and this time I didn't walk away. I started the process. I'm filing for separation from my husband, and I'm planning to step down as CEO within the next 6 months. The words came out in a rush, like she'd been holding them in all day and couldn't contain them any longer. I haven't told the board yet. I haven't told my husband. I haven't told my son. You're the first person I've said this to out loud, and I don't even know why I'm telling you except that you're the only person who knows what it cost me to keep pretending. Daniel stood up, pacing the small porch. Victoria, I know this affects the promotion I offered you. I know it changes everything. I'm asking you to keep this confidential until I can make it official, but I needed you to know before you made your decision. Because if you take the position based on thinking I'll be running the company, that's not fair to you. Whoever takes over after me might have completely different priorities. They might undo everything I'm trying to build. Why are you doing this? Daniel asked. Why now? Because last night I sat across from you and admitted I couldn't remember the last time I felt anything real, and then I went home and looked at myself in the mirror and realized I couldn't stand one more day of being this person. Because my son called this morning to tell me he's switching his major from business to creative writing, and he sounded terrified that I'd be disappointed, and I realized I'd created a relationship where my own child is afraid to tell me who he actually wants to be. Her voice cracked. Because I'm 42 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years becoming someone I don't even like. And if I don't stop now, I never will. Daniel thought about Emma asking if he'd choose a new job over staying where she was happy. He thought about Sarah's text saying his uncertainty was the first honest thing he'd said in years. He thought about Victoria offering him a promotion toward the very life she was trying to escape. I'm not taking the position, he said quietly. I don't need until Friday. I already know. Silence on the other end of the line. Then, can I ask why? Because you were right this morning. I have a choice you didn't give yourself, and I'm choosing not to become what you're trying to stop being. I'm choosing to stay visible and present, and maybe invisible to the people who measure success in titles and salaries, but visible to the people who actually matter. Emma, Victoria said softly. Emma, Daniel confirmed. And myself. I can't show her what integrity looks like if I'm constantly compromising it for security. What will you do instead? I don't know yet. That's terrifying, and maybe it's exactly right. Daniel looked up at the stars barely visible through the Los Angeles light pollution. But I know I can't keep optimizing myself out of existence. I know I can't keep choosing safety over authenticity and calling it responsibility. Whatever comes next has to be something I can look Emma in the eye about. Victoria's breathing was audible over the phone, ragged and real. I'm scared, Daniel. I'm absolutely terrified that I'm making the biggest mistake of my life. Maybe, Daniel said. Or maybe the biggest mistake was spending so long being who everyone needed instead of figuring out who you actually are. What if there's nothing underneath? What if I strip away Victoria Lane, CEO, and there's just emptiness? Then you build something real from the ground up. Something that belongs to you instead of to the expectations. He paused, then added more gently, and you don't have to do it alone. You have your son who's brave enough to tell you he wants to write instead of run companies. That takes courage, and he learned it somewhere. Maybe from watching you hold it together all these years. Maybe he's braver than you think because you taught him to be. I should let you go, Victoria said after a moment. Thank you for listening, and thank you for refusing the promotion. I think that might be the kindest thing anyone's done for me in years, refusing to let me make you complicit in my own pattern. Victoria? Daniel said before she could hang up. Whatever comes next, it's going to be messy and hard, and people are going to judge you for it. But you'll survive. And on the other side of it, you might actually recognize yourself. I hope you're right. Me too. After she disconnected, Daniel sat back down on the porch and finished his beer, feeling the weight of what they'd both just chosen. No safety net, no clear path forward, just the decision to stop pretending that optimization and success were the same as actually living. His phone buzzed again, but this time it was a text from Rosa, his neighbor. Saw your light on. Everything okay? Daniel smiled at the simple human concern, the kind of connection that didn't require performance or status. Yeah, he typed back. Everything's okay. Just making some changes. Good changes? He thought about that for a moment, then answered honestly. Don't know yet, but real ones. Inside, Emma stirred and called for him, some dream interrupting her sleep. Daniel went to her, settled her back down with soft words and presence, then stood in her doorway watching her sleep with her rabbit clutched tight. Tomorrow he'd go to work and officially decline the promotion that Marcus would probably kill for. Tomorrow Victoria would continue the process of dismantling a life that looked perfect from the outside but felt like suffocation from within. Tomorrow they'd both take another step away from safety and toward something more honest and terrifying and possibly worth the cost. But tonight, standing in his daughter's doorway in a house that was small but theirs, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. The possibility that being fully present in an ordinary life might matter more than all the optimized success in the world. And for the first time since his divorce, that possibility felt like enough. The morning Daniel walked into Victoria's office to officially decline the promotion, he found her standing at the window with her back to the door, perfectly still in a way that suggested she'd been there for a while. The city spread out below her like a kingdom she no longer wanted to rule. "Come in," she said without turning around. "Close the door." Daniel did as instructed, noticing details he'd never paid attention to before. The diplomas on the wall documenting her ascent through prestigious institutions, the awards from industry organizations, the photographs of Victoria shaking hands with politicians and business leaders, all of them capturing moments of professional triumph while revealing nothing about the person behind the smile. "I told the board yesterday," Victoria said, still facing the window. "Emergency session, confidential. I informed them I'll be stepping down as CEO effective July 1st and filing for separation from my husband. The separation won't be public until the legal paperwork is filed next week, but the board needed to know both things because they affect succession planning and potential stock volatility." Daniel waited, understanding this was information she needed to share but wasn't yet ready to discuss face to face. "Richard Hayes threw his water glass against the wall," Victoria continued, and Daniel could hear the dark amusement in her voice. Richard was the board chairman, a man whose control over his emotions was legendary. Actual glass, actual wall, actual shattering. Then he composed himself and asked if I was having a nervous breakdown. I told him I was having the opposite, that I was finally waking up after 20 years of sleepwalking through a life that looked perfect from the outside. How did they take it? Exactly as you'd expect. Concern about optics, about investor confidence, about transition timelines. Susan Martinez asked if I'd considered therapy instead of resignation. David Chen wanted to know if this was negotiable, if there was a compensation package that would make me reconsider. Victoria finally turned to face him, and Daniel was struck by how different she looked. Not diminished, but somehow more present, as though making the decision had returned color to a painting that had been slowly fading. No one asked if I was okay. No one asked what I needed. They asked what this meant for them, for the company, for the stock price. Which is fair, I suppose. That's their job. But it still hurts, Daniel said quietly. Yes, it does. Victoria moved to her desk and sat down, gesturing for Daniel to take the chair across from her. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what you're walking away from. Marcus will take the regional coordinator position. He's exactly the wrong choice. He'll maximize short-term revenue while destroying client relationships and team morale. But the board wants someone who won't rock the boat during the transition, and Marcus is nothing if not predictable. Within a year, everything I was trying to build will be dismantled in favor of quarterly earnings optimization. And you're okay with that? I have to be. Because the alternative is staying and watching it happen anyway, while slowly eroding into nothing. At least this way I get to leave on my own terms. She folded her hands on the desk with the controlled precision that had become her signature. So, you wanted to decline the promotion officially. Consider it declined and noted in your file. Your current position remains unchanged, and this decision will have no negative impact on your standing with the company. Daniel nodded, but didn't move to leave. Something about the conversation felt incomplete, as though they were dancing around what actually needed to be said. What will you do? He asked. After July. I don't know. That's the terrifying part. Victoria's fingers drummed once against the desk, a rare tell of anxiety. I've never not known. I've always had the next goal, the next milestone, the next version of success to pursue. Now I'm walking away from all of it with no plan except to stop being who I've been. Your son, Daniel said. Cameron. Have you told him? Victoria's expression softened in a way he'd never seen at work. I called him last night, told him I was getting divorced and leaving the company, and that I was proud of him for choosing creative writing instead of business. He cried. My 19-year-old son, who I'd trained to present nothing but competence and control, he cried on the phone and told me he'd spent the last year terrified of disappointing me, and I realized I'd created exactly the same prison for him that I'd built for myself. What did you say? I told him the truth, that I'd been so focused on teaching him how to succeed that I'd forgotten to teach him how to be happy, that I was sorry for modeling a life of achievement without fulfillment, that I was trying to change, and it was okay if he didn't believe me yet, but I was going to prove it through actions instead of words. She paused, her composure cracking slightly. He asked if he could come home this summer. Not to the house in Hancock Park. He said he never felt comfortable there. But home. Somewhere with me. Wherever that ends up being. And I said yes without knowing where that will be or what it will look like. Daniel thought about Emma asking if they'd have to move, the simple faith that wherever they went, they'd go together. That's brave. Both of you. It doesn't feel brave. It feels reckless and terrifying, and like I'm destroying everything I've built on the hope that there's something real underneath worth keeping. There is, Daniel said with more certainty than he felt. I saw it that night at the Blue Note. You wouldn't be this scared if there wasn't something real at stake. Victoria stood abruptly and moved back to the window, her silhouette sharp against the Los Angeles skyline. Daniel, can I ask you something personal? Yes. When your marriage ended, how long did it take before you stopped feeling like you'd failed? The question landed heavy between them. Daniel considered lying, offering some platitude about time healing all wounds, but Victoria deserved better than that. I still feel it sometimes, he admitted. Not every day anymore, but it's there. The sense that I should have tried harder, compromised more, been different somehow. But I've learned to recognize it as the voice of the person I was trained to be. The one who equated success with never giving up, even when giving up was the healthiest choice. The real failure wasn't ending the marriage. It was waiting so long to admit it wasn't working. I'm 42 years old, Victoria said softly. I've spent half my life becoming someone who doesn't exist outside of titles and achievements. What if I can't figure out who I am without them? Then you'll build it piece by piece, the same way you built the company. Except this time, you'll build something that actually belongs to you. Victoria turned back to face him, and for a moment she looked vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with weakness and everything to do with honest uncertainty. I need to ask you for something, and you have every right to say no. Daniel waited. I'm going to need help through this transition, not professional help. The board will handle succession planning, and I'll have lawyers for the divorce. I need someone who'll tell me the truth when I'm retreating into old patterns. Someone who'll call me out when I'm performing instead of being present. Someone who understands what it costs to choose authenticity over optimization. She paused, clearly uncomfortable asking for anything. I know that's not your job. I know I have no right to ask. But that night at the Blue Note, you gave me permission to be honest about not being okay. And I need that permission to continue, especially when everything gets harder. Daniel thought about what she was actually requesting. Not friendship exactly, but something more complicated. A kind of accountability partnership between two people trying to unlearn decades of careful self-erasure. I can do that, he said. On one condition. What? You do the same for me. Because I'm scared too. I turned down the promotion and I don't know what comes next. I know I can't keep optimizing myself into invisibility, but I don't have a plan beyond that. And Emma's watching me to see if integrity actually matters more than security. I need to believe that choice is worth something, even when it's terrifying. Victoria's smile was small but genuine. So we'll both stumble through this together. Two people who don't know what they're doing but are trying to do it honestly. Exactly. When does Emma's school year end? The question seemed random until Daniel understood where she was going. 3 weeks. Why? Because in 3 weeks, I'll be gone from this office, and my marriage will be public knowledge, and the industry vultures will be circling. And I'll need to remember that there are people in the world who value presence over performance. Would you and Emma want to meet me somewhere? Somewhere normal. Maybe get ice cream or visit a park. Something simple where I can practice being a person instead of a position. Daniel thought about bringing Emma into this complicated situation, then realized that was exactly wrong. Emma wouldn't see complications. She'd see a person who needed kindness, the same way she'd see any adult who was struggling. There's a park near our house with ducks Emma likes to feed, he said. Nothing fancy, just grass and a pond, and families having picnics. That sounds perfect. A knock at the door interrupted them. Victoria's assistant peeked in, her expression apologetic. Ms. Lane, the auditors are here for the quarterly review. They're set up in conference room A. Victoria's posture shifted automatically, her shoulders straightening, her expression smoothing into professional neutrality. Daniel watched the transformation with recognition. He'd done the same thing countless times, putting on the armor required to navigate corporate spaces. I'll be there in 2 minutes, Victoria said. The assistant nodded and withdrew, closing the door again. That's what I mean, Victoria said, turning back to Daniel. Did you see that? The instant shift. I don't even think about it anymore. Someone needs Victoria Lane, CEO, and I become her automatically. I need to learn how to not do that, how to be whoever I actually am instead of whoever the situation requires. It won't happen overnight, Daniel said. You've spent 20 years building those reflexes. I know. That's why I need people who'll notice when I'm doing it and call me on it. She glanced at her watch. I need to get to that meeting. But Daniel, thank you for refusing the promotion, for agreeing to this strange accountability arrangement, for not looking at me like I'm crazy for walking away from everything. You're not crazy, Daniel said. You're just finally sane enough to realize you were suffocating. He left her office and returned to his cubicle, where Marcus was already spreading the news about his promotion to regional coordinator with barely concealed triumph. Several colleagues congratulated Marcus with the kind of enthusiasm people show when they're calculating how to leverage someone's rise for their own benefit. Bad luck, Reed, Marcus said when he spotted Daniel. But hey, not everyone's cut out for leadership. Some people are better suited for steady middle management. No shame in knowing your limits. Daniel looked at Marcus. At the aggressive ambition, the zero-sum worldview, the complete absence of self-awareness about the hollowness of what he was pursuing, and felt something close to pity. You're right, Daniel said mildly. I'm exactly where I need to be. Marcus looked momentarily confused by the lack of defensiveness, then shrugged and moved on to his next audience. Daniel settled into his desk and pulled up his client files, reviewing the relationships he'd built over years of consistent presence and genuine attention to people's needs. There was satisfaction in that, even if it wasn't the kind that came with titles and corner offices. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. Emma told me you turned down a big promotion. Want to tell me what's going on? Daniel stepped outside to call her, finding a quiet corner of the building's plaza where he could talk without being overheard. I made a choice, he said when Sarah answered. The promotion would have meant more money and more responsibility, but it also would have meant becoming someone I don't want to be. I chose differently. Sarah was quiet for a long moment. Is this about us? About trying to prove you've changed? No, this is about Emma, about showing her that integrity matters more than safety, about not making the same mistakes we made, building a life around what we thought we should want instead of figuring out what we actually value. That's very evolved of you, Sarah said, and he couldn't tell if she was being sincere or sarcastic. But Daniel, you still need to support your daughter. Noble choices don't pay for soccer camp or college funds. I know. I'm not being reckless. I'm still employed, still stable. I'm just not going to sacrifice who I am for marginal increases in security. Who you are, Sarah repeated. Do you even know who that is? Because the Daniel I was married to spent most of his time being whoever the situation required. Dependable husband, responsible father, competent employee. But I could never figure out who you actually were underneath all that performance. The observation stung because it was true. I'm trying to figure that out, better late than never. Emma deserves a father who knows himself, Sarah said, her voice softening slightly. I hope you find him. But be careful, Daniel. Self-discovery is great in theory, but in practice it usually just means blowing up your life and calling it growth. After they disconnected, Daniel stood in the plaza watching people come and go. Purposeful, busy, optimization in motion. Everyone pursuing their version of success, most of them probably just as lost as he was, but better at hiding it. His phone rang again. Victoria. "Everything okay?" he answered. "The auditors just left. They found everything in order, which is good for the transition, but also weirdly disappointing. Part of me hoped they'd find some massive problem that would require me to stay and fix it. Give me an excuse to retreat into familiar territory." She paused. "I'm doing it again, defaulting to work because I don't know how to exist without it. This is harder than I thought." "It's been less than 24 hours since you told the board," Daniel pointed out. "Give yourself more than a day to unlearn 20 years of patterns." I know you're right, but I'm sitting in this office that's been mine for 8 years, looking at everything I've built, and I keep thinking about your ex-wife's question. Who are you if you're not this? And I don't have an answer." "Maybe that's okay. Maybe the answer isn't something you remember. It's something you build." Victoria laughed, but it sounded hollow. "You're very good at saying comforting things that don't actually make the terror go away." "I'm not trying to make it go away. I'm just trying to help you survive it long enough to see what's on the other side." "What if there's nothing on the other side? What if I get through all this and I'm just empty?" Daniel thought about Emma's question about whether he was good at his job, and his answer about being good at showing up and being present. "Then you'll fill the emptiness with something real instead of something performed, but you won't know until you actually walk away from what you have now." "I hate that you're right. I hate that I don't know if I'm right. I'm making this up as I go along too." They talked for another few minutes about nothing particularly important, logistics of her transition timeline, questions about what Emma liked to do at parks, the kind of surface conversation that felt necessary because the deeper conversation was too exhausting to sustain. When they hung up, Daniel felt the weight of what they'd both chosen pressing down like atmosphere. That evening, after Emma was in bed, Daniel pulled out his laptop and did something he'd been avoiding for 3 years. He opened his resume. Not to apply for jobs, but to look at what he'd built his professional identity around. Sales manager, client relations, strategic account development. All of it accurate, all of it true, none of it touching anything that actually mattered about who he was or what he valued. He created a new document and started writing, not a resume, but something more honest. A list of things he'd learned that weren't on his CV. How to make pancakes that Emma actually ate, instead of just rearranged on her plate. How to sit with someone's pain without trying to fix it. How to recognize when optimization was just another word for erasure. How to value presence over performance, even when presence didn't come with salary increases or impressive titles. It wasn't a plan. It wasn't even particularly coherent, but it was real in a way his professional accomplishments had never been, and that felt like progress. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, but when he opened it, he recognized the message immediately. It was a photo of a legal document. Petition for dissolution of marriage. Victoria's name at the top. Filed that afternoon. The text that followed was simple. No turning back now. Daniel typed a response. Good. Forward movement, even when it's terrifying. Especially when it's terrifying, Victoria wrote back. That's how you know it matters. The next 3 weeks passed in a strange liminal space where everything looked the same from the outside while fundamentally shifting underneath. Daniel went to work, managed his accounts, attended meetings where Marcus held forth about his vision for the regional office with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned whether success and fulfillment were the same thing. He picked Emma up from school, helped with homework, navigated the normal machinery of single parenting while feeling increasingly disconnected from the person who'd built that machinery. Victoria remained visible at Nexus, professional, competent, managing the transition with the same precision she'd brought to everything else. But Daniel noticed the small changes, the cracks in the armor. She left work at reasonable hours instead of staying until midnight. She declined optional evening events. She spoke in meetings with less performance and more directness, occasionally saying, "I don't know," instead of manufacturing certainty. The industry press caught wind of her resignation before the official announcement, and the speculation started immediately. Health issues, board conflicts, personal scandals. No one seemed capable of imagining that someone might walk away from power simply because it was destroying them from the inside. The divorce filing became public knowledge 10 days before Emma's school year ended. Daniel saw it trending on business Twitter, complete with hot takes about Victoria's judgment and fitness for leadership. The cruelty was casual and absolute. People who'd never met her pronouncing definitive verdicts about her character based on the fact that she'd failed at marriage while succeeding at business. He texted her, "Don't read the comments. Nothing good lives there." Her response came hours later. "Too late. But you're right. I need to stop looking for validation from people who've never valued anything except the armor I'm trying to shed." The official announcement of her resignation came on a Tuesday afternoon, delivered via press release and accompanied by a carefully worded statement about pursuing new opportunities and spending more time with family. The stock dropped 3% in after-hours trading. The board appointed an interim CEO and announced a formal search process. Marcus sent a company-wide email about maintaining focus during the transition, already positioning himself as a steady hand in uncertain times. Daniel read the press release at his desk and felt the weight of what Victoria was walking away from, the empire she'd built, the identity she'd constructed, the safety that came from being the person everyone needed instead of figuring out who she actually was. Then he thought about her voice on the phone saying she couldn't stand one more day of being that person. And he understood that sometimes the most courageous thing you could do was admit that success wasn't worth the cost of your soul. On Emma's last day of school, Daniel picked her up early and took her for ice cream, a tradition he'd started after the divorce to mark transitions with something sweet instead of just letting them happen. They sat outside the shop with their cones, chocolate chip for Emma, vanilla for Daniel, and watched the world pass by. "Daddy, why did you say no to the new job?" Emma asked suddenly, her face serious despite the ice cream smeared on her chin. Daniel had been waiting for this question, knowing Emma was too perceptive to accept vague explanations indefinitely. "Because the new job would have made me someone I don't want to be. Someone who's always busy and stressed and not very present. And being present with you matters more to me than having a fancier title." Emma considered this while working on her cone. "Is that why you and Amami got divorced? Because you weren't being who you wanted to be?" The question hit harder than it should have, probably because it was so close to the truth. "Partly, yeah. Mommy and I both forgot to be ourselves. We were so busy being what we thought we should be that we forgot to check if we were happy. We're both trying to do better now." "Are you happy?" Emma asked, her dark eyes searching his face for truth. Daniel thought about it honestly. "I'm happier than I was. I'm not all the way there yet, but I'm trying to get there." "Good," Emma said with the finality of someone who'd resolved an important question. "Because I like it when you're happy. You're funnier." Daniel laughed and wiped ice cream off her chin. "Yeah? I'm funnier? Way funnier. When you're sad, you just make dad jokes. When you're happy, you make actual jokes. I didn't realize there was a difference." "There's a huge difference, Daddy. Huge." They finished their ice cream and drove home, and Daniel felt something settle in his chest. Not certainty exactly, but the sense that he was finally moving in the right direction, even if he didn't know the destination. Emma sang along to the radio with unselfconscious enthusiasm, and Daniel let her terrible pitch wash over him like absolution. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel texted Victoria, "3 weeks are up. Still want to meet at the park on Saturday?" The response came immediately. "Yes, I need it. This week has been brutal. What time works? Whenever Emma wants to feed the ducks. I'll work around her schedule." Daniel smiled at that small shift. Victoria Lane, former CEO, organizing her day around a 6-year-old's preferred duck feeding time. 2 p.m., he wrote. "Bring old bread if you have it. The ducks have opinions." Noted. "Thank you for this, Daniel, for not giving up on the idea that I might be worth knowing without the title." "You are," he wrote back. "You just need to start believing it yourself." Saturday arrived overcast and cool, the marine layer that usually burned off by noon lingering into the afternoon. Daniel and Emma arrived at the park at 1:50, Emma carrying a bag of stale bread she'd been saving for this purpose, chattering about which ducks were her favorites and how you could tell them apart if you paid attention. Victoria was already there, sitting on a bench near the pond in jeans and a plain sweater, her hair loose around her shoulders instead of pulled back in its usual severe style. She looked younger this way, more vulnerable, absolutely nothing like the CEO who'd commanded boardrooms with a glance. She stood when she saw them approaching, and Daniel watched Emma take in this stranger with the cautious curiosity of someone deciding whether to trust. "Emma, this is my friend Victoria," Daniel said. "Victoria, this is Emma." "Hi," Emma said, slightly shy. "Did you bring bread for the ducks?" Victoria held up a bag. "I did. Your dad said they have opinions." "They do," Emma confirmed seriously. "The big white one is bossy and takes all the best pieces. You have to throw some far away so the little ones get some too." "That seems fair," Victoria said, and something in her voice made Emma smile. They walked to the edge of the pond together, and Emma began her tutorial on proper duck feeding technique with the authority of an expert. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking questions and following instructions, and Daniel watched two people who existed in completely different worlds find common ground in the simple act of being present with each other. The ducks came immediately, recognizing Emma as a reliable source of food. She distributed bread with careful fairness, scolding the bossy white duck when it got too aggressive, making sure the smaller ducks got their share. Victoria followed her lead, and soon they were both laughing at the ducks' antics, at the way they jostled and competed and occasionally fell over themselves in their enthusiasm. Daniel stood back and watched, feeling something in his chest that might have been hope or might have been the beginning of healing, and for once, he didn't try to analyze it or optimize it or figure out what it meant. He just let it exist, this moment of ordinary grace in a world that usually demanded performance. And for the first time in years, that felt like enough. After the bread was gone and the ducks had dispersed across the pond, with the disappointed air of performers whose audience had left, Emma tugged on Victoria's sleeve with the unselfconscious familiarity of a child who'd decided someone was safe. "Do you want to see the playground?" Emma asked. "There's swings and a really good climbing structure that looks like a castle." Victoria glanced at Daniel, and he saw the question in her eyes. Was this okay? Was she overstepping? Was she allowed to exist in this simple moment without calculation or agenda? "Go ahead," Daniel said. "I'll be right here if you need me." Emma grabbed Victoria's hand and pulled her toward the playground with the authority of a tour guide, already explaining the social hierarchy of the various play structures, and which kids from her school usually claimed which territory. Victoria followed, and Daniel watched them go with a strange mixture of emotions he couldn't quite untangle. Protectiveness over Emma, hope for Victoria, and something deeper about witnessing two people from such different worlds finding connection through nothing more complicated than presence. He settled onto the bench Victoria had vacated and pulled out his phone, intending to catch up on email, but instead found himself just watching his daughter teach a former CEO the proper technique for the monkey bars. Victoria was terrible at them, her corporate fitness routine apparently not including upper body strength training, and Emma found this hilarious and encouraging in equal measure. "You have to swing more," Emma instructed from her perch 3 bars ahead. "Don't just reach. Swing your body forward and then grab." Victoria tried again, made it 2 bars further than her previous attempt, then dropped to the ground laughing in a way that sounded rusty, as though she'd forgotten how. Emma dropped down beside her and patted her shoulder consolingly. "It's okay. It takes practice. I couldn't do it either until I was 5. "Well, I'm a bit older than 5, so I should probably practice more," Victoria said, and Emma nodded with such serious agreement that Victoria started laughing again. Daniel's phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Is Emma with you?" "She's not answering my texts. She's at the park. Phone's in my car." "Everything's fine." "With who?" Daniel hesitated, then decided on honesty. "A friend from work. We're just feeding ducks and playing at the playground." The 3 dots appeared and disappeared several times before Sarah's response came through. "A friend. Is this friend a woman?" "Yes. But it's not what you're thinking. I'm not thinking anything. I'm just asking. Emma mentioned you've been different lately. Happier. I wanted to make sure it was healthy different." Daniel looked at Victoria and Emma now sitting in the sandbox, building something elaborate that involved significant engineering discussion about structural integrity. It's healthy. I promise. Okay. Tell Emma to text me when she gets back to your place. And Daniel, I'm glad you're happier. You deserve that. The unexpected kindness in Sarah's message caught him off guard. Their divorce had been civil but not warm, both of them too exhausted by the slow death of their marriage to have energy for bitterness. But this felt like something more. Genuine care from someone who'd once loved him and still wanted him to be okay, even though they'd failed at being married. Thank you, he wrote back. That means more than you know. Emma and Victoria spent another 20 minutes in the sandbox before Emma declared their castle complete and announced she was thirsty. They walked back to where Daniel sat, Emma's hand still comfortably in Victoria's, both of them slightly dusty and much more relaxed than when they'd arrived. Daddy, can we get smoothies? Emma asked. There's that place by the bookstore. Sure, Daniel said, standing and brushing off his jeans. Victoria, you want to join us? Victoria looked between them, and Daniel saw her calculating whether accepting would be an imposition, whether she should gracefully exit now that the duck feeding was complete, whether she deserved to extend this moment of normalcy. Please come, Emma said before Victoria could answer. You can tell me about your job. Daddy said you're really important at his company. I was, Victoria corrected gently. I just left that job, actually. I'm trying to figure out what comes next. Oh, Emma said, processing this with visible thought. Is that scary? Terrifying, Victoria admitted, and Daniel loved her for not sugarcoating it. But sometimes scary things are good things too, right? Emma looked to Daniel for confirmation. That's what you told me when Mommy and Daddy got divorced, that it was scary, but also maybe good because we could all be more honest. Daniel felt his throat tighten at his own words reflected back through his daughter's memory. Yeah, baby. That's exactly right. They walked the 3 blocks to the smoothie shop, Emma between them holding both their hands and narrating an elaborate story about the ducks they'd fed and the complex social dynamics of duck society. The marine layer was finally burning off, late afternoon sun breaking through in golden shafts that made everything feel softer, more possible. The smoothie shop was crowded with weekend families, but they found a table outside on the patio. Emma ordered strawberry banana with the confidence of someone who'd made this choice many times before. Victoria ordered the same, saying she trusted Emma's judgment. Daniel got mango and paid before Victoria could object. So, what are you going to do now that you left your job? Emma asked, once they were settled with their smoothies. Are you going to get a new one? Victoria took a long sip before answering, clearly thinking about how to explain complicated adult decisions to a 6-year-old. I'm not sure yet. I spent a lot of years working very hard at that job, and I was good at it, but it also took up so much of my life that I forgot to figure out what else I cared about. So now I'm trying to remember. Like what? Emma asked, swinging her legs under the table. Well, I used to really love music, jazz specifically, and I used to paint sometimes, nothing professional but just for fun. And I liked being outdoors, hiking, and exploring, but I stopped doing all of those things because I was always working. That's sad, Emma said with the blunt honesty of childhood. Working is important, but you also have to do fun things. That's what Daddy says. He says if you only work, you forget how to be happy. Victoria met Daniel's eyes across the table, and he saw his own words landing differently in her context. Your dad is very smart. I know, Emma said matter-of-factly. He's smart about feelings. He's not as smart about math. I'm better at math than him. That's because you're brilliant, Daniel said, ruffling her hair. You get that from your mom. They finished their smoothies while Emma told Victoria about school and her friends and the elaborate drama of 6-year-old social politics. Victoria listened with complete attention, asking follow-up questions and responding with the same seriousness she'd probably once brought to boardroom negotiations. When Emma excused herself to use the bathroom, Victoria and Daniel sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the weekend crowd flow past. Thank you for this, Victoria said quietly. I didn't realize how much I needed it until right now. Just being normal. Being present with people who don't want anything from me except presence back. Emma likes you, Daniel observed. She doesn't usually warm up to people this fast. She's extraordinary. You're raising someone who's emotionally intelligent and kind and confident. That's not an accident. Some days it feels like pure luck that I haven't completely messed her up yet. Victoria shook her head. It's not luck. You're intentional about being present with her. You listen to her. You take her seriously. Those aren't small things. She paused, her fingers tracing patterns in the condensation on her empty cup. I got an email from Cameron yesterday. He's coming home next week once his finals are done. He asked if we could spend time together. Real time, he said. Not scheduled calls or obligatory dinners, but actual time where we figure out who we are to each other. That's good, isn't it? It's terrifying. What if he realizes there's nothing there? What if I spent so long being CEO that I forgot how to be his mother, and now it's too late to figure it out? Victoria, look at what you just did. You spent an hour playing with Emma and building sandcastles and feeding ducks. You were completely present and she felt it. You already know how to do this. You just have to trust yourself enough to try. Emma returned from the bathroom and announced she wanted to walk to the bookstore, which was 2 doors down. Daniel paid for the smoothies and they made the short journey, Emma already cataloging which books she wanted to look at. The bookstore was one of the few independents that had survived the various retail apocalypses, stubbornly persisting through a combination of community loyalty and the owner's refusal to optimize profitability at the expense of character. It smelled like old paper and coffee, with narrow aisles and books stacked in piles that suggested organization by some system known only to the proprietor. Emma made straight for the children's section with practiced efficiency. Victoria wandered toward the poetry section, and Daniel followed, curious what she'd gravitate toward. She pulled out a slim volume and opened it to a random page, reading silently. When she noticed Daniel watching, she showed him the poem, something about the courage required to shed the self you've constructed and meet whatever's underneath. Too on the nose? She asked, with a slight smile. Maybe exactly on the nose. Sometimes the obvious thing is obvious because it's true. Victoria bought the book along with 2 others, one about mindfulness and one about the philosophy of work that Daniel suspected was either incredibly helpful or would end up gathering dust depending on where she was in her journey. Emma emerged with 3 books, and Daniel negotiated her down to 1 with the practiced ease of a parent who'd fought this battle many times. They walked back toward the park where their cars were parked, Emma between them again, chattering about the book she'd chosen. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the sidewalk, and Daniel felt the afternoon winding down with the peculiar melancholy that accompanied good things ending even when you knew they'd happened exactly as long as they needed to. At the parking lot, Emma hugged Victoria goodbye with the unself-conscious affection she showed people she'd decided to love. Victoria looked momentarily overwhelmed by the gesture, then hugged back with careful tenderness. "Can Victoria come to the park again?" Emma asked Daniel. "She needs to practice the monkey bars." "If she wants to," Daniel said, leaving the choice to Victoria. "I'd love that," Victoria said, and the honesty in her voice suggested she meant it. "Maybe I'll be better at them next time." "You will be," Emma assured her. "Practice makes improvement, that's what my teacher says. Not practice makes perfect, because perfect is boring, but practice makes improvement." After Emma had climbed into the car and buckled herself in, Daniel lingered for a moment with Victoria in the parking lot. "How are you really doing?" he asked. Not the brave face version, the real version. Victoria looked toward the pond where they'd fed the ducks hours earlier, gathering her thoughts. "Some moments I'm okay. Like today, I was genuinely happy, present, not performing or calculating or trying to be anything except available to what was happening. But then I go home to that massive empty house, and the silence is so loud I can barely stand it. I wake up at 3 a.m. and panic about what I've done, about whether I've made a catastrophic mistake, about whether I'll regret this for the rest of my life." And what do you do when that happens? Sometimes I call Cameron. He's 2 hours ahead on the East Coast, so it's 5 a.m. there, but he answers anyway and talks me down. Sometimes I go for drives through the city at 4 in the morning when no one else is awake. Sometimes I just sit with it and try not to run away from the fear. She met his eyes. "And sometimes I reread the texts you've sent, reminding me that this is hard because it matters. And that helps more than you'd think." Daniel felt the weight of being someone's anchor when he was barely keeping his own head above water. "I'm figuring this out too, you know. I don't have answers." I know, that's why it helps. You're not selling me solutions or trying to fix me. You're just reminding me I'm not alone in the uncertainty. Victoria pulled her keys from her pocket, a signal that she was preparing to leave, but not quite ready yet. Daniel, can I ask you something? Always. Do you ever regret the divorce? Not the reasons for it, but the actual choice. Do you ever wish you just kept pretending for Emma's sake? The question hung between them, heavy with parallel meaning. Daniel thought about the nights after Sarah left when he'd wondered the same thing, when he'd calculated whether Emma's stability was worth his own slow erasure. Sometimes, he admitted, usually at 3 a.m. when I can't sleep and the doubts are loudest. But then Emma does something like what she did today. She shows up fully herself, confident and kind and honest about her feelings. And I realized that modeling authenticity matters more than modeling endurance. She needed to see that sometimes the brave thing is admitting something isn't working instead of suffering through it forever. Even when it hurts. Especially when it hurts. Because that's when the choice actually means something. Victoria nodded slowly, processing this. Cameron told me something yesterday. He said he was relieved when I announced the divorce because it meant I was finally being honest. He said he'd spent years watching me and his father perform marriage instead of living it, and it taught him that love was just another optimization problem to solve. And now I get to show him something different, but only if I actually follow through instead of retreating into new versions of the same patterns. You're going to retreat sometimes, Daniel said gently. You're going to default to old behaviors because they're comfortable and familiar. That's not failure. That's just being human. The question is whether you notice when you're doing it and choose to try something different. Like you calling me out when I'm performing instead of being present. Exactly like that. Emma honked the horn from inside the car, not aggressively, but enough to signal her patience was wearing thin. Victoria smiled at the sound. I should let you go. Thank you for today. For Emma. For the ducks and the smoothies and the reminder that there are ways to exist that don't require armor. Same time next week, Daniel offered. If you want to keep working on those monkey bars. Yes, please. I'll practice in between. Daniel watched her drive away in a car that probably cost more than he made in 2 years, then climbed into his Honda where Emma was already narrating her version of the day's events into her imagination. I like Victoria, Emma announced as they pulled out of the parking lot. She's sad, but she's trying not to be. Like you were after the divorce. Daniel glanced at his daughter in the rearview mirror, constantly amazed by her capacity to see what adults tried to hide. Yeah, baby, she is. Are you going to help her like people helped you? I'm going to try. Good, because everyone needs help sometimes, even grown-ups, even important people. That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel sat on his back porch with a beer he actually wanted this time, feeling the day settle into his bones like good exhaustion. His phone buzzed with a text from Victoria. I just watched the sunset from my deck and actually noticed it instead of having it happen in my peripheral vision while I worked. Small victories. Daniel smiled and typed back, That's not small. That's everything. Cameron arrives Thursday. I'm terrified. He's probably terrified too. Be terrified together. At least it's honest. Thank you for today. Thank you for Emma. Thank you for not giving up on the idea that I might be worth the effort. Daniel stared at that message for a long moment before responding. You are. You just need to start believing it yourself. And stop thanking me. We're in this together, remember? Together. Right. That's still strange for me. It's strange for both of us. We'll figure it out. The next week passed in a rhythm that was becoming familiar. Work during the day where Daniel maintained his accounts and watched Marcus implement exactly the kind of short-term thinking that would maximize quarterly numbers while destroying long-term relationships. Evenings with Emma, where they cooked together and read together and existed in the simple grace of routine. Victoria texted periodically with updates that ranged from hopeful to panicked, and Daniel responded with whatever truth felt most useful in the moment. Thursday afternoon, Victoria sent a photo of a young man with dark hair and her same intense eyes standing in what looked like her foyer, surrounded by luggage and wearing an expression of cautious hope. He's here. We ordered pizza and we're going to talk. Wish me luck. You don't need luck. You need honesty. You're already good at that. The response came hours later, well past midnight. We talked until 1 a.m. Really talked. He told me things I never knew about how lonely he felt growing up, about how he learned to perform competence because that's what got my attention, about how scared he is that he doesn't know how to be authentic because I never modeled it. And I told him I'm sorry. I told him I'm trying to change, and I know it's late, but I'm trying. And he cried, and I cried, and it was the most honest conversation we've had in his entire life. Daniel read the message 3 times, feeling the enormity of what Victoria had just navigated. That's brave, both of you. That's what rebuilding looks like. He wants to know if you and Emma would have dinner with us sometime. He says he wants to meet the people who are helping me remember how to be human. Of course, Emma would love it. Let me know when. Saturday arrived and they met at the park again, but this time Cameron was there too, tall and slightly awkward in the way of 19-year-olds who haven't quite grown into their adult bodies. Emma was initially shy around him, but Cameron pulled out a battered notebook and asked if she wanted to hear a story he was working on, and within minutes they were sitting on the grass while he read her something about a girl who could talk to animals. Victoria and Daniel sat on their usual bench, watching the two of them with the peculiar satisfaction of parents witnessing their children connect with the wider world. He's writing stories about connection and empathy, and people learning to see each other, Victoria said quietly. Everything I spent 20 years not teaching him, he's teaching himself through fiction, and it's beautiful and devastating all at once. He learned it somewhere, Daniel pointed out. Maybe not from your words, but from watching you survive, from seeing you hold things together even when it cost you. That takes strength too. I don't want him to learn what I learned. I don't want him to think survival requires self-erasure. Then show him something different now. You're already doing it. They fed the ducks again, all 4 of them this time, and Emma showed Cameron her preferred technique while Victoria attempted the monkey bars with marginally more success than the previous week. Afterward, they got smoothies, and Cameron told them about his creative writing program and his favorite professors and the story collection he was trying to build. He had Victoria's intensity but none of her armor, and Daniel could see Victoria watching her son with a mixture of pride and grief for all the years she'd missed really knowing him. At dinner, pizza at a casual place Emma loved, Cameron asked Daniel what he did at Nexus. Sales management, Daniel said. Client relationships. Nothing as impressive as what your mom built. But you turned down a promotion, right? Mom mentioned that. She said you chose integrity over advancement. Daniel glanced at Victoria, who looked slightly embarrassed at being caught talking about him. I chose presence over performance. The promotion would have required me to become someone I didn't want Emma to see me be. Cameron nodded thoughtfully. I spent most of my life watching people optimize themselves into nothing. Success without substance, achievement without connection. It's why I started writing, to figure out what actually matters when you strip away all the performance. And what have you figured out? Victoria asked, her voice careful. Cameron looked at his mother with an expression that was equal parts love and sadness. That the people worth knowing are the ones who show you their scars instead of their trophies. That vulnerability takes more courage than competence. That showing up honestly matters more than showing up impressively. He paused, then added more gently, I'm glad you're figuring that out too, Mom. Even if it's late, even if it's hard, I'd rather have you honest than impressive. Victoria's composure cracked, tears sliding down her face that she didn't bother to hide. Cameron reached across the table and took her hand, and Emma watched with solemn fascination, understanding something important was happening even if she couldn't articulate what. I'm sorry it took me so long, Victoria said through tears. I'm sorry I taught you to perform instead of to feel. I'm sorry I was so focused on building an empire that I forgot to build a relationship with you. You're here now, Cameron said simply. That's what matters. After dinner, they walked back to the parking lot through streets lit by street lamps and the warm glow from restaurant windows. Emma held Cameron's hand and asked him more questions about his stories, and Daniel walked beside Victoria in companionable silence. I don't know what I'm doing, Victoria said quietly. With him, with my life, with any of this. I'm just showing up and hoping presence is enough. It is, Daniel said. You're showing him that change is possible even after decades of patterns. That's a gift. Or a burden. What if I can't sustain this? What if I retreat into old behaviors and disappoint him all over again? Then you'll notice you're doing it and you'll choose differently. You'll mess up and apologize and try again. That's what authenticity looks like. Not perfection, but honest effort. Victoria nodded, but Daniel could see her struggling with the uncertainty, with the absence of clear metrics for success or failure. They reached the cars and Emma hugged everyone goodbye with her characteristic enthusiasm. Cameron thanked Daniel for dinner and for being kind to his mother, which suggested Victoria had talked about their friendship more than Daniel had realized. After Cameron and Victoria had driven away, Emma buckled herself in and looked at Daniel with serious eyes. "Victoria's getting better at being sad," she observed. Daniel started the car, considering this assessment. "What do you mean?" "Before she was sad but pretending not to be. Now she's sad but being honest about it. That's better. That's how you fix sad. You have to be honest about it first." Out of the mouths of 6-year-olds, Daniel thought, wisdom that adults spent thousands on therapy to relearn. "You're right, baby. That's exactly how you fix sad." That night, after Emma was asleep, Daniel received a text from Victoria with a photo attached. It showed her and Cameron on her deck watching the sunset together, both of them visible in profile, and the caption read, "Day 1 of actually being his mother instead of performing the role. Thank you for showing me this was possible." Daniel typed back, "You did this yourself. I just reminded you that you could." "No. You showed me what presence looks like. You showed me that choosing connection over achievement isn't weakness, it's wisdom. You gave me permission to value what actually matters." "We gave each other permission," Daniel corrected. "This is mutual, remember?" "It is. And I'm grateful for it. For you, for the space to figure out who I am when I'm not performing power." Daniel set his phone down and looked around his small living room with its secondhand furniture and Emma's artwork on the walls and absolutely nothing that would impress anyone measuring success by traditional metrics. And for the first time since his divorce, he felt something close to contentment, not because everything was figured out, but because he'd finally stopped trying to optimize his life into someone else's definition of achievement. His phone buzzed one more time. Victoria again. "Cameron wants to know if we can make this a regular thing." Saturday afternoons. "The 4 of us. He says spending time with you and Emma reminds him what healthy relationships look like." Daniel thought about the implications of that, the commitment it represented, the vulnerability required to keep showing up, the risk of disappointment or failure. Then he thought about Emma's confidence that everyone needs help sometimes, even important people. And he typed his response. "Every Saturday. We'll make it work." And somehow, in the commitment to keep showing up for each other, flawed and uncertain and trying, Daniel felt the first real foundation forming under his feet since he'd walked away from the safety of optimization and chosen the terrifying honesty of actual living. The Saturdays became their anchor point, the fixed star around which the rest of their increasingly uncertain lives could orient themselves. Through the last weeks of June and into July, the 4 of them met at the park with a consistency that felt almost revolutionary in its ordinariness. No agenda beyond presence, no performance beyond showing up honestly. Daniel watched Victoria transform in increments so small they were almost invisible day to day, but unmistakable across weeks. She laughed more easily. She stopped checking her phone compulsively. She sat on the grass without worrying about grass stains on expensive clothes she'd stopped wearing anyway. Cameron opened up in her presence, reading passages from stories he was working on, asking her opinion not about commercial viability, but about emotional truth. Emma appointed herself Victoria's personal monkey bar coach and took the responsibility with characteristic seriousness. But Daniel also saw the moments when Victoria's composure fractured, when the weight of what she'd walked away from crashed over her like a wave. She'd get quiet mid-conversation, her eyes distant, and he recognized that look. The 3 a.m. panic arriving unexpectedly at 2 in the afternoon, the sudden vertigo of choosing uncertainty over safety. It was during the 4th Saturday, watching Emma and Cameron build an elaborate sand kingdom complete with moat and drawbridge, that Victoria finally broke. "I got a call from Richard Hayes yesterday," she said, her voice carefully neutral in a way that signaled strong emotion underneath. "The board chairman, he wanted to know if I'd reconsider my resignation. They're struggling with the transition. The interim CEO isn't working out. Stock prices are down 12%. Several major clients have expressed concerns about continuity. Daniel kept his eyes on the kids, giving Victoria space to work through whatever she needed to say. What did you tell him? I told him no, that my decision was final and they needed to move forward without me. And he got angry, really angry in a way board chairmen aren't supposed to show. He said I was being selfish, that I had obligations to the company, to the employees, to the shareholders, that walking away during a transition crisis was unconscionable. Victoria's hands were shaking slightly. And part of me wanted to agree with him. Part of me wanted to apologize and come back and fix everything because that's what I've spent 20 years doing, fixing things, managing crises, being the person everyone could depend on. But you didn't, Daniel said quietly. No, I didn't. But Daniel, it's been 2 months, and I still wake up every morning with this crushing sense that I've made a catastrophic mistake. I left everything. My marriage is over, my career is over, my entire identity is dismantled, and I don't know what I'm building in its place. I just know I'm terrified every single day that this was all a massive error in judgment. Cameron looked up from the sandcastle, clearly having overheard despite the distance. Mom, you want to walk? Victoria nodded gratefully, and she and Cameron headed toward the pond, their heads close together in conversation. Emma came running over to Daniel, Sandy, and Happy. Are they okay? She asked, following his gaze. They're figuring it out, Daniel said. Sometimes people need to talk about hard things. Emma considered this with her usual gravity, then climbed into Daniel's lap, still damp from the water fountain. Daddy, do you think Victoria is going to go back to her old job? I don't know, baby. Why? Because she seems happier now. When she first came to the park, she smiled, but her eyes were sad. Now her eyes smile too. If she goes back to her old job, her eyes might get sad again. Daniel held his daughter close, breathing in the chlorine and sunscreen smell of her, marveling at her capacity to see what adults tried to hide. You're very wise, you know that? I know, Emma said without false modesty. Mrs. Henderson says I'm emotionally perceptive. That means I notice feelings. They sat together watching Victoria and Cameron circle the pond, deep in animated conversation. Whatever Cameron was saying seemed to be helping. Victoria's posture was less rigid, her gestures more natural. After a full circuit, they returned, and Cameron gave his mother's shoulder a squeeze before heading back to the sandcastle with Emma. Victoria sat down next to Daniel on the bench, her composure mostly restored but still fragile around the edges. He told me something I needed to hear. He said he spent the last 3 years watching me build a perfect life that was killing me, and seeing me walk away from it was the bravest thing he'd ever witnessed. He said he doesn't need me to be successful, he needs me to be present, and that if I go back to Nexus, he'll support me, but he'll also know that I chose performance over authenticity again, and it'll confirm everything he's afraid of about relationships requiring self-erasure. That's a lot of pressure, Daniel observed. It is, but it's also true. I keep waiting for the moment when this all makes sense, when I can look back and say with certainty that I made the right choice. But that moment isn't coming. I just have to choose every day to keep being honest, even though it's terrifying. Even though I don't know what I'm building, even though every instinct tells me to retreat into what's familiar. That's all any of us are doing, Daniel said. I turned down that promotion 3 months ago, and I still wake up some mornings wondering if I made a mistake. If I should have taken the security, the stability, the clear path forward. But then Emma does something like what she just did. Notices that your eyes smile differently now. And I remember why I chose this. Not because it's easier, but because it's real. Victoria was quiet for a long moment, watching her son and Daniel's daughter collaborate on engineering solutions for their sandcastle. I need to tell you something. I've been avoiding it because it feels like admitting defeat, but I think that's exactly why I need to say it out loud. Daniel waited, understanding this was important. I'm seeing a therapist. Have been for 6 weeks now. Twice a week, sometimes 3 times when it gets bad. And it's excruciating, sitting in that office talking about why I spent 2 decades building a life I didn't want, why I confused achievement with worth, why I couldn't just walk away earlier before the cost got so high. Victoria's voice wavered slightly. She asked me last week who I am when I'm not Victoria Lane, CEO. And I couldn't answer. I literally sat there in silence for 15 minutes, because I don't know. I constructed this entire identity around external validation, and now that it's gone, I don't know what's left. What's left is the person who shows up here every Saturday to feed ducks and practice monkey bars and listen to her son read stories, Daniel said. What's left is someone who's brave enough to admit she doesn't have answers instead of manufacturing certainty. That's not nothing, Victoria. That's everything. It doesn't feel like everything. It feels like I'm starting over at 42 with less than I had at 22, because at least then I had hope and ambition. Now I just have uncertainty and this constant low-grade terror that I've ruined my life. Emma and Cameron were heading toward them now, the sandcastle apparently complete and requiring adult inspection. Victoria quickly composed herself, smoothing away the visible cracks, but Emma noticed anyway. "Victoria, are you crying?" Emma asked with characteristic directness. Victoria considered lying, then visibly chose honesty. "A little bit, yes. Sometimes grown-ups cry when they're figuring out hard things." "That's okay," Emma said, patting Victoria's knee with sandy hands. "Crying helps. Daddy cries sometimes too. He thinks I don't know, but I hear him sometimes after I go to bed. But then he's better in the morning." Daniel felt exposed by his daughter's observation, but also strangely grateful for her refusal to let adults hide behind performance. Victoria looked at him with understanding that needed no words. "Come see our castle," Cameron said, offering his hand to his mother. "It's architecturally unsound but emotionally significant." They all trooped over to admire the sandcastle, which was indeed structurally questionable but undeniably created with care and collaboration. Emma explained the various features with tour guide enthusiasm, while Cameron added narrative elements about the fictional kingdom the castle represented. Victoria listened and asked questions and didn't once retreat into the polished performance of interested executive humoring children. She was just present, and Daniel could see how much effort that required and how much it mattered. After the park, they got smoothies. This too had become ritual. And Cameron asked Daniel about work, how it felt to stay in a position when he could have advanced. "Honest answer," Daniel said. "Some days it feels like cowardice, like I'm settling for safety instead of reaching for something more. But most days it feels like the only choice that lets me look Emma in the eye and know I'm modeling integrity instead of optimization." "Do you think you'll stay there?" Cameron asked. "Long term?" Daniel had been asking himself the same question with increasing frequency. "I don't know. I think I needed to refuse the promotion to prove to myself that I could choose differently. But I'm not sure staying in the same position forever is the answer either. I'm just not ready to figure out what comes next." "That's where Mom is too," Cameron observed. "This in-between space where the old life is over, but the new one hasn't started yet." "It's an uncomfortable space," Victoria said, "but maybe that's the point. Maybe we're supposed to be uncomfortable instead of constantly seeking comfort and calling it success." They finished their smoothies and walked to the bookstore, another ritual component. Emma headed for the children's section while Cameron browsed literary journals, and Victoria picked up a book about women who'd left corporate careers to pursue creative work. Daniel found himself in the philosophy section, pulling out volumes about meaning and purpose and the examined life. At the register, the owner, a woman in her 60s who'd run the store for 30 years, recognized them from previous weeks. "You folks are becoming regulars," she said, ringing up their purchases. "It's nice seeing families that actually talk to each other instead of everyone on their phones." "We're not exactly family," Victoria said automatically, then stopped. "Actually, I don't know what we are. Friends supporting each other through transitions?" "Family's whoever shows up consistently with love," the owner said with the casual wisdom of someone who'd observed human nature across 3 decades. "Doesn't have to be blood, just has to be real." They left the bookstore with those words hanging between them, testing the edges of what they were building together. Daniel drove Emma home, and Victoria and Cameron headed to her house, which Victoria had listed for sale the previous week, another bridge burning behind her. That night, after Emma was in bed, Daniel's phone rang. Victoria, and from her voice he could tell she'd been crying again. "I'm sorry to call so late," she said, "but I'm having one of those 3 a.m. moments, except it's only 9:30 and I can't make it stop." "What happened?" "Nothing happened. That's the problem. I spent the entire evening with Cameron having dinner and talking and watching a movie, and it was lovely and normal and exactly what I wanted. And then he went to bed, and I was alone in this enormous house that I'm selling, in a life I'm dismantling, and I just started spiraling. What if I can't do this? What if I'm not strong enough? What if 6 months from now I'm destitute and alone, and everyone was right that I was crazy to walk away? Daniel settled onto his back porch, giving her his full attention. Those are the fear questions. They're loud, but they're not true. You're not going to be destitute. You have resources most people never dream of. You're not going to be alone. Cameron is there. I'm here. You're building actual relationships instead of professional networks. And you're not crazy. You're just doing something hard that most people don't have the courage to attempt. But what if I fail? Define failure. Because from where I'm sitting, you've already succeeded at the hardest part. You chose honesty over performance. Everything else is just logistics. Victoria was quiet for a moment, her breathing gradually steadying. My therapist said something similar. She said I keep waiting for external validation that I made the right choice. But that validation isn't coming because this isn't about right or wrong. It's about choosing a life that's mine instead of one that looks impressive to other people. She sounds smart. She is. She's also relentless about calling me out when I'm retreating into old patterns. Last session, she pointed out that I've been treating our Saturday afternoons like a performance review, measuring my progress, evaluating my growth, optimizing my recovery. She asked what would happen if I just showed up without agenda and let things be messy and uncertain. What did you say? I said that sounded terrifying and completely against my nature. And she said maybe that's exactly why I need to try it. Victoria laughed, but it sounded more genuine than bitter. I'm really bad at this, Daniel, at being uncertain and messy and not having a strategic plan for everything. You're not bad at it. You're just new to it. There's a difference. They talked for another 20 minutes about nothing particularly important, books they were reading, observations about the summer heat, Emma's latest elaborate imaginative game. When they finally said goodnight, Victoria sounded steadier, and Daniel felt the weight of being someone's anchor even as he struggled to keep his own head above water. The weeks continued their pattern. Work during the day where Daniel watched Marcus systematically destroy the client relationships he'd spent years building. Evenings with Emma where they existed in their bubble of ordinary grace. Saturdays with Victoria and Cameron that felt increasingly like the most honest part of his week. In late July, Victoria's house sold for an amount that made Daniel briefly question every financial decision he'd ever made. She and Cameron moved into a small rental in Silver Lake. 2 bedrooms, nothing fancy, close to the Blue Note where this had all started. She sent Daniel a photo of the apartment, sparsely furnished and completely unpretentious, with the caption, "This is the first place I've lived that feels like mine, instead of like a set design for a successful person's home." Early August brought a shift Daniel hadn't anticipated. He arrived at work Monday morning to find an email from Jennifer Park, the director of client relations, requesting an urgent meeting. His first thought was that Marcus had finally found a way to push him out, that the cost of refusing the promotion was coming due. Jennifer's office was small but impeccably organized, everything in its place with the precision of someone who controlled what she could. She gestured for Daniel to close the door and sit down. "I'm going to be direct because I think you'll appreciate that," Jennifer said without preamble. "The restructuring Marcus implemented is failing catastrophically. Client retention is down 23%. Team morale is abysmal. 3 of our best managers have quit in the last month. The board is panicking because the interim CEO's plan isn't working, and Marcus's aggressive tactics are accelerating the decline." Daniel waited, unsure where this was going. "I've been reviewing the data on which managers maintained their numbers during the transition," Jennifer continued. "You're the only one in the Western region who didn't see a significant drop in client satisfaction or retention. Your team actually reported increased morale during a period when everyone else is tanked, so I need to understand what you're doing differently." "I'm not doing anything revolutionary," Daniel said carefully. "I'm just treating clients like human beings with ongoing needs instead of numbers to optimize. I'm investing in relationships instead of transactions." That's what Victoria tried to implement before she left, the relationship-based model. Marcus dismantled it as soon as he took over. Jennifer leaned forward, her expression intense. "I'm putting together a proposal for the board, a different approach to the Western region that prioritizes exactly what you've been doing, and I want you to lead it. Daniel felt his stomach drop. Jennifer, I already turned down a promotion. I'm not interested in climbing the ladder. This isn't about climbing. This is about protecting what actually works from people who only understand optimization. You'd have autonomy to manage the region your way. You'd mentor other managers in the relationship approach. You wouldn't report to Marcus. You'd report directly to me. And before you ask, yes, it comes with a significant raise because the board understands they need to incentivize people to stay during this mess. Why me? You barely know me. Because Victoria recommended you. Before she left, she gave me a list of managers she thought embodied the principles she was trying to build. Your name was at the top. She said you understood that presence matters more than performance, that you valued integrity over advancement, and that you'd already proven you could refuse opportunities that compromised your values. Jennifer's expression softened slightly. She also said you're one of the few genuinely good people she's encountered in 20 years of business, and that if I wanted to salvage anything from the wreckage of this transition, I should start by listening to you. Daniel thought about Victoria making that recommendation before she left, planting seeds that were only now bearing fruit. He thought about Emma asking if he was good at his job. He thought about the difference between optimizing yourself out of existence and actually building something that mattered. Can I think about it? He asked. You have until Friday. Same timeline Victoria gave you on the last offer, which I suspect is intentional. Jennifer stood, signaling the meeting was over. Daniel, I know you're cautious about advancement, but this isn't about becoming what Victoria was trying to escape. This is about protecting space for a different way of working to actually exist. Sometimes refusing to engage is the right choice, but sometimes engagement is how you create change instead of just avoiding corruption. Daniel left her office with his mind spinning, the parallel to his earlier choice unmistakable, but the context completely different. He texted Victoria immediately. Jennifer Park just offered me a position. Said you recommended me before you left. Need to talk. The response came within minutes. Can you come over tonight? After Emma's in bed? Cameron's out with friends? We can actually talk. Daniel arranged for Rosa to stay late with Emma and drove to Silver Lake just after 9, finding Victoria's rental tucked on a quiet street lined with jacaranda trees. She answered the door in jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, looking more like a graduate student than a former CEO. The apartment was sparsely furnished but comfortable, secondhand furniture that didn't match, Cameron's books stacked on shelves made from cinder blocks and planks, Victoria's jazz albums organized beside a vintage turntable. It felt lived in and honest in a way her Hancock Park mansion never had. I'm sorry for ambushing you with the recommendation, Victoria said once they were settled on her mismatched couch with coffee. I should have told you I put your name forward, but I did it the week before I left, when I was still trying to protect what I'd built, and then everything imploded so fast I forgot I'd even done it. Tell me honestly, is this a good opportunity or another trap? Victoria set down her coffee and turned to face him fully. Honest answer? I don't know. Jennifer is genuine about wanting to protect the relationship-based model. She understands what's at stake, but she's also working within a system that's fundamentally broken, and systems have gravity. They pull you toward optimization even when you're trying to resist. So I'd be fighting an uphill battle. Yes, but Daniel, you'd also be creating space for a different way of working to exist. You'd be mentoring managers who might otherwise get crushed by Marcus's approach. You'd be proving that presence and integrity can coexist with professional success. Victoria paused, choosing her words carefully. When I offered you the regional coordinator position, I was asking you to become what I was trying to escape. This is different. This is Jennifer asking you to be who you already are, but with enough authority to protect that approach from being dismantled. And if I fail? If the system corrupts me the way it corrupted you? Then you'll notice it happening and you'll choose differently. That's what we're learning, isn't it? That we're not trapped by our choices. We can always choose again. Daniel thought about Emma's observation that Victoria's eyes smiled differently now, about Cameron saying he needed to see healthy relationships modeled, about his own constant questioning whether refusing advancement was integrity or just fear disguised as principle. What would you do? He asked Victoria. If you were in my position? Victoria smiled sadly. I can't answer that. 6 months ago, I would have told you to take it without hesitation. 3 months ago, I would have told you to run away from anything that looked like advancement. Now, I think I'd tell you to check in with yourself about what you actually want, not what seems safest or most impressive. And then trust that you're capable of maintaining integrity even in complicated systems. That's not very helpful, Daniel said, but he was smiling. No, it's not, but it's honest, which is apparently what we're practicing. They talked for another hour, working through the implications and the risks and the potential. Victoria shared her experience of how corporate environments shaped behavior, how even well-intentioned people got pulled toward optimization, how the key was maintaining external accountability and regularly checking whether you were still choosing presence over performance. When Daniel finally left just before midnight, he felt no closer to a decision, but somehow clearer about the questions he needed to ask. He drove home through empty streets, thinking about the difference between refusing engagement and creating space for change, between protecting yourself from corruption and isolating yourself from influence. Saturday arrived, and they met at the park as usual, but this time Daniel brought the job offer into their conversation, laying it out for Cameron and Emma to weigh in with their unfiltered perspectives. Would you have to work more? Emma asked, cutting straight to what mattered to her. Probably some more, Daniel admitted. Not as much as the first promotion would have required, but definitely more than now. But would you be happy at work? Emma pressed. Or would it make your eyes sad like Victoria's used to be? I don't know yet, baby. That's what I'm trying to figure out. Cameron had been listening quietly, and now he spoke up. Can I ask you something? When you turned down the first promotion, was it because you didn't want advancement, or because you didn't want to become what that specific advancement required? The question landed with precision. The second one. I didn't want to become what that position would have made me. So the question isn't whether you want this new position, Cameron continued. It's whether this position would require you to compromise the things you value. If it doesn't, if you can actually do the work while maintaining integrity, then refusing it might be about fear instead of principle. Victoria looked at her son with undisguised pride. When did you get so wise? I've been watching you figure out the difference between authentic choices and fear-based ones, Cameron said. Seemed relevant. They fed the ducks, and Emma worked with Victoria on the monkey bars. She could now do 6 bars consistently, which they celebrated with appropriate ceremony. Later, over smoothies, Daniel found himself thinking about Jennifer's comment that sometimes engagement was how you created change instead of just avoiding corruption. I think I'm going to take it, he said aloud, testing how the words felt. Not because it's safe or impressive, but because refusing it would be about fear. Fear that I can't maintain integrity in a position of influence. Fear that I'll become what Victoria was trying to escape. But that fear is just another form of optimization, protecting myself from possible failure instead of trying to build something real. That sounds right, Victoria said quietly. That sounds like an authentic choice instead of a fear-based one. Monday morning, Daniel walked into Jennifer's office and accepted the position. She looked genuinely relieved, admitting that she'd had no backup plan if he'd refused. They spent the next 2 hours outlining the structural changes Daniel would implement, the managers he'd work with, the metrics they'd use to measure success that prioritized long-term relationships over quarterly revenue. The announcement went out that afternoon, and Marcus's response was immediate and predictable. A terse email congratulating Daniel while making it clear he viewed this as a challenge to his authority. Several colleagues who'd ignored Daniel for years suddenly wanted lunch meetings. The corporate machinery adjusted to his new position with the smooth efficiency of systems accommodating change while ensuring nothing fundamental shifted. But Daniel also received messages from managers he'd worked with, people who'd watched him maintain his principles while everyone else bent toward optimization. They wanted to know if the relationship-based approach was real, if they could actually prioritize presence over performance without destroying their careers. That evening, Emma asked how his first day in the new job had been. Complicated, Daniel said honestly. But good. I think I'm going to be able to help people work differently, more honestly. That's good, Emma said with satisfaction. Because your eyes don't look sad. They look tired, but not sad. There's a difference. Over the next month, Daniel discovered that Cameron had been right. Engagement was harder than isolation, but also more meaningful. He spent his days coaching managers on how to build genuine client relationships, pushing back against Marcus's quarterly optimization mandates, creating protected space for a different approach to exist within a system designed to crush it. It was exhausting and frequently frustrating, but it was also real in a way his previous work had never been. Victoria's transformation continued its uneven trajectory, some days confident in her choices, other days questioning everything. She started painting again, filling the rental apartment with canvases that were technically amateur but emotionally honest. Cameron finished his first short story collection and started submitting to literary magazines. Their Saturday afternoons remained the anchor point, the reminder that presence mattered more than achievement. In early September, Victoria showed up at the park with news that shifted everything. "I got a job offer," she said without preamble. Well, not exactly a job. A consulting opportunity. Small nonprofit focused on helping women transition out of corporate careers. They want me to develop their leadership program, mentor their participants, share what I've learned about walking away from success that's destroying you. "Are you going to take it?" Daniel asked. "I think so. It's part-time, low stakes, genuinely purpose-driven instead of profit-driven. I'd be helping people navigate the exact transition I just went through." Victoria smiled, and Daniel noted that Emma was right. Her eyes smiled differently now, with something real behind them. "It feels like the first thing I've considered doing since leaving Nexus that's about contribution instead of achievement, about presence instead of performance." "That sounds perfect for you." "It terrifies me, which probably means it's right. My therapist says I should stop trusting my comfort and start trusting my values. This aligns with my values even though it's uncomfortable." Cameron came running over, dragging Emma by the hand. "Mom, Emma says there's a jazz concert in the park next Saturday. Can we go?" "All of us?" Victoria looked at Daniel, and he saw the question in her eyes. Was this okay? This expansion of their Saturday ritual, this deepening of whatever they were building together? "Emma would love that," Daniel said. "I would too." The concert was small and informal. Local musicians playing for neighbors gathered on blankets in the grass. Daniel and Victoria sat side by side while Emma and Cameron claimed space closer to the stage, and for the first time since that night at the Blue Note, Daniel felt Victoria fully relax into the moment. Not performing presence, but actually experiencing it. "I've been thinking about that night," Victoria said during a quiet transition between songs. "When you drove me to the Blue Note and I fell apart in your passenger seat. I was so desperate that night, so completely at the end of my ability to keep pretending. And I asked you to take me somewhere private, and you easily could have misunderstood what I was asking for." "But I didn't," Daniel said. "No, you saw what I actually needed, not escape or distraction or scandal, but witness. Someone to see the truth I couldn't say out loud to anyone else. And that night changed everything. It gave me permission to stop performing, to admit I was suffocating, to imagine that walking away might be possible." She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "You saved my life, Daniel. Not dramatically, but actually. You saw me drowning and you threw me a rope, and you've kept throwing ropes every time I've started to sink since then." "You did the same for me," Daniel said quietly. "I was disappearing into strategic invisibility, optimizing myself out of existence, and you showed up and offered me advancement I didn't want. And that gift of the wrong offer helped me understand what I actually needed. We saved each other." "We did, didn't we?" Victoria smiled, and it reached her eyes completely. "I think that's what we've built here. Not romance or professional networking or any of the categories people would try to fit this into. We've built mutual rescue, two people who recognized each other's drowning and decided to keep each other afloat." The musicians launched into an upbeat number, and Emma came running back to pull Victoria toward the front where people were dancing. Victoria looked to Daniel for permission, and he waved her on, watching his daughter and this woman who'd become family in ways that transcended traditional definitions dance together without self-consciousness or performance. Cameron dropped down beside Daniel on the blanket. "She's different now," he observed. "My mom. She's actually here instead of just physically present while her mind works on problems. It's still new, and sometimes she defaults to old patterns, but she's trying. She's really trying." "So are you," Daniel pointed out. Letting her in. Trusting that she means it when she says she's changing. That takes courage, too. I learned that from watching you with Emma, the way you're completely present with her, the way you let her see you struggle instead of performing competence. She trusts you because you're real with her. Cameron paused, then added more quietly, I want that with my mom, and I'm starting to believe it's possible. The concert ended as the sun set, the sky turning orange and pink over the Los Angeles skyline. They packed up their blanket and walked to a nearby restaurant, continuing the evening because none of them were ready for it to end. Over dinner, Cameron read them a new story he'd written about a woman who walked away from a kingdom to find herself. And Victoria cried openly at the obvious parallels while Emma held her hand with fierce protectiveness. The weeks folded into months, September giving way to October and then November. Daniel's position stabilized into something sustainable, still challenging, still requiring constant vigilance against optimization creep, but genuinely aligned with his values. Several managers he mentored started implementing the relationship-based approach and saw their client satisfaction scores rise even as their quarterly numbers stayed flat. Jennifer protected his work from board pressure, understanding that they were planting seeds for long-term transformation even if the harvest wasn't immediate. Victoria started her consulting work with the nonprofit and discovered she was good at mentoring women through the exact crisis she'd navigated. She was honest about the terror, the uncertainty, the constant temptation to retreat into familiar patterns. Her participants responded to the lack of polish, the admission that transformation was messy and ongoing rather than a clean narrative of success. Emma turned 7 with a birthday party at the park, where both her parents attended along with Victoria and Cameron, and if anyone found the configuration unusual, they didn't say so. Cameron gave Emma a hand-bound book of stories he'd written specifically for her, each one featuring a brave girl who saw the truth others missed. Victoria gave her a set of art supplies with a note saying that creating things mattered more than optimizing things. In early December, Sarah asked to meet Daniel for coffee. They hadn't done this since the divorce, their interactions limited to brief exchanges during Emma pickups and drop-offs. Daniel agreed with some trepidation, unsure what she wanted to discuss. They met at a cafe midway between their houses, and Sarah looked good, relaxed in a way she'd never been during their marriage, her shoulders no longer perpetually tensed against disappointment. I wanted to tell you something, Sarah said once they had their coffee. I'm seeing someone. It's new, but it's real, and it's getting serious enough that I want Emma to meet him soon, but before that happens, I wanted to talk to you. Daniel felt the news land with surprising neutrality. Not pain exactly, but a kind of melancholy for what they'd never managed to build together. I appreciate you telling me. Does Emma know? Not yet. I wanted your blessing first. Not permission, but blessing. I want us to be able to navigate this together for her sake. Of course you have my blessing, Daniel said, and meant it. You deserve to be happy, Sarah. You deserve someone who can be fully present with you in ways I never managed. Sarah's eyes glistened slightly. You're different now, lighter somehow. Emma talks about you and Victoria and Cameron, about your Saturdays at the park. She says you laugh more now. I do, Daniel admitted. I finally stopped trying to optimize my life into someone else's definition of success. Turns out presence matters more than performance. I'm glad you figured that out. I wish we'd both figured it out before we got married, but I'm glad you know it now. Sarah paused, then added, Victoria sounds good for you. Emma really likes her. We're not together, Daniel clarified. Not romantically. It's different from that. More complicated and maybe more important. We're each other's accountability for staying honest about who we are instead of who we're supposed to be. Sarah smiled with understanding. That might be more valuable than romance. I hope you keep it, whatever it is. They finished their coffee talking about logistics for Emma meeting Sarah's boyfriend, about holiday schedules, about the ordinary machinery of co-parenting. When they parted, Sarah hugged him with genuine warmth, and Daniel felt the last threads of guilt about their divorce finally release. They'd both found different versions of happiness, and that was enough. The Saturday before Christmas, they met at the park despite the December cold, bundled in jackets and scarves. Victoria had news. The nonprofit wanted to expand her role, offering her a permanent position developing their national program. It would be more hours, but still purpose-driven, still focused on helping people escape the traps of success that destroyed them from inside. I'm going to take it, she said with more confidence than Daniel had heard from her in months. Not because it's impressive or well paid, but because it matters. Because I'm good at it in ways that feel authentic instead of performed. Because I wake up thinking about the participants I'm mentoring instead of dreading another day of optimization. I'm proud of you, Daniel said, and watched her receive the compliment without deflecting or minimizing. Cameron had his own news. He'd been accepted to a MFA program in creative writing, full scholarship, starting next fall. He'd been afraid to tell Victoria, worried she'd see it as impractical or insufficient, but she'd celebrated with genuine joy and no trace of the disappointment he'd feared. Emma, not to be left out, announced that she'd been chosen to read her essay about kindness at the school assembly, which she considered equivalent achievement and demanded celebration with appropriate gravitas. They fed the ducks one last time for the year, the pond partially frozen at the edges, the birds clustering in the remaining water. Emma's technique had become expert, and she'd taught Cameron and Victoria everything she knew about fair distribution and bossy duck management. I was thinking, Victoria said as they walked back toward their cars, maybe we should make this official, not in any legal sense, but as a chosen family, the four of us, because that's what we've become. People who show up for each other consistently, who witness each other's transformations, who hold each other accountable for staying honest about who we are. I like that, Daniel said. Chosen family, built on presence instead of obligation. Can we still do Saturdays when I'm in college? Cameron asked, his voice uncertain. I know I'll be across the country, but maybe holidays and summers? Always, Victoria said firmly. Geography doesn't change commitment. We'll figure it out. Emma looked up at the three adults surrounding her, her young face serious. So we're a family now? Like officially? If you want to be, Daniel said. I want to be, Emma declared, because you're all my people, the ones who show up and see me and don't make me be anything except myself. They stood together in the parking lot as the December afternoon faded toward evening, four people from completely different starting points who'd found each other through mutual recognition of what drowning looked like, and mutual commitment to keep swimming towards something more honest. Thank you, Victoria said quietly to Daniel, for that night in your car when you could have refused to drive me anywhere, for seeing what I actually needed instead of what I seemed to be asking for every Saturday since then, for not giving up on me when I wanted to give up on myself. Thank you for the same, Daniel said. For offering me advancement, I had the courage to refuse. For modeling what it looks like to walk away from everything when staying was destroying you. For choosing honesty even when it cost you everything you'd built. Cameron put his arm around his mother's shoulders. Emma grabbed Daniel's hand and Victoria's simultaneously, creating a connection between them all. And in that moment, Daniel understood what they'd actually built. Not a solution to their problems or an escape from uncertainty, but a foundation of presence strong enough to support the ongoing work of becoming who they actually were instead of who they'd been trained to be. The sun set over Los Angeles, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new questions, new moments of doubt and fear. But tonight, standing together in a parking lot with the people who'd chosen to see each other clearly and show up anyway, Daniel felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not certainty, not achievement, not the optimization of problems into solutions, just presence, just honesty, just the quiet courage of people who'd survived their various drownings and decided to keep swimming together. And somehow, impossibly, that was enough.